One early summer morning in 2013 began with an unusual disturbance on a quiet street in Alhambra, California. 6 unmarked police cars silently pulled up in front of an old single-story apartment complex nestled among rows of sun-faded palm trees. Neighbors peered through their curtains as officers in tactical gear fanned out around the area, moving silently and precisely like a well-rehearsed ritual. Inside, Derek Malden, 57 years old, was preparing his tools for the morning, a routine he had maintained for nearly 30 years as a diligent HVAC technician who still fixed air conditioners for the entire neighborhood and lived a life without any scandals. A rapid knock came at 6:39 a.m. Derek Malden, Los Angeles Police Department. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with disappearances beginning in 1991. Officers later recalled that his hand trembled slightly as he set the coil of wire down on the floor, but his face remained eerily calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment for more than 2 decades. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Los Angeles in 1991 entered summer with an atmosphere blending vibrant daily life and unpredictable shadows. Crime rates were rising, surveillance systems were rudimentary, security cameras were rare and mostly found only at major stores, while residential areas like Hollywood Hills relied largely on streetlights and the vigilance of individual households. The winding slopes, the distance between houses, and the nighttime quiet made it a place where incidents could easily occur without immediate notice. In that context, Alyssa Monroe, 22 years old, living alone in a small apartment halfway up the hill, began a day like any other. She left her workplace in West Hollywood in the late afternoon, stopped by a nearby grocery store, then drove home around 8:40 p.m. Alyssa had plans to meet a friend after 10 p.m. So after arriving, she called a friend at 9:02 p.m. to confirm the time. A neighbor in the apartment across the way saw the lights in Alyssa's home on until around 9:45 p.m. When they went out completely, a detail they later remembered, because the area was usually quite dark at night, and any change in light was easily noticeable through the window. From that point onward, no one saw Alyssa again. The friend she was supposed to meet waited in vain, called multiple times, but received no answer. This was considered unusual because Alyssa was always punctual and rarely missed an appointment without notice. Her roommate returned home around 11 p.m. Siption, finding the apartment unusually quiet with no sign that Alyssa had left briefly. Alyssa's car was still parked in the driveway and her usual purse was still there. Continued calls went unanswered, and no one could determine where she was during that time. As hours passed without contact from Alyssa, family members began receiving messages from friends and felt the abnormality had gone beyond ordinary missed plans. After the family checked all possible places Alyssa might have gone, from friends' homes and co-workers to her part-time job, but found no trace anywhere, they had to acknowledge that this prolonged absence was no longer personal or spontaneous like her previous busy occasions. Near midnight, with all attempts at contact met with silence, the Monroe family officially called the LAPD to report Alyssa missing. LAPD received the report and dispatched a patrol unit to Alyssa's apartment that same night. Upon approaching the scene, officers noted the surrounding area was completely quiet, with no prior reports of chaos or unusual noises. Entering the apartment, they conducted a preliminary observation. Belongings were largely intact, with no major disturbance. All lights were off, consistent with the neighbor's report of lights going out around 10 p.m. The front door was locked from the inside as usual, while the back door was slightly ajar. A detail unusual enough to note, but not sufficient to confirm forced entry. Officers recorded information from the roommate and family about Alyssa's last contact at 9:02 p.m., after which all calls went unanswered. The last sighting by the neighbor and the prolonged silence created a fairly clear window of disappearance, but without any accompanying violence or physical evidence to support a criminal argument. Based on observations, the patrol unit classified the case as missing under unusual circumstances, meaning an unexplained disappearance, but without grounds to categorize it as high risk or serious. An initial report was filed documenting the time of scene approach, positions of items, condition of entry points, and direct witness information, but no specific clues yet pointed to criminal activity. The responsible officer explained that, due to the absence of signs of coercion, violence, damage inside the home, and Alyssa's car still being present, the unit could not upgrade the case to a criminal investigation. The report emphasized the lack of probable cause, reasonable grounds to believe a crime had occurred, forcing them to continue handling it within the scope of search and verification of missing person status. Family and the roommate provided additional details about Alyssa's habits, but officers could only record them without incorporating them into an investigative assessment due to the lack of corroborating evidence. After a final sweep of the entire apartment to ensure no obvious signs were missed, they concluded the preliminary check with the case still classified as an unexplained disappearance, no criminal investigation opened, and a request for the family to stay in contact should new information about Alyssa emerge. Immediately after the patrol unit completed the initial scene assessment at Alyssa Monroe's apartment, LAPD shifted focus to gathering statements from residents in the surrounding area to identify any unusual movements, sounds, or signs occurring around the time of Alyssa's last sighting. Officers started with adjacent apartments, prioritizing those with views toward the backyard or the slope where Alyssa's back door opened, as it was the only area showing signs of irregularity during their initial approach. A neighbor upstairs reported that sometime after 9:30 p.m., they heard what sounded like slow footsteps moving along the exterior walkway, not loud enough to be considered disruptive, but still distinct from the usual nighttime quiet of Hollywood Hills. This person could not determine the number of people, gender, or direction of movement, only describing it as unfamiliar to the daily sounds of nearby residents. Another witness, living across from Alyssa's apartment on the other side of the slope, reported seeing a figure move quickly through the shadows near Alyssa's backyard fence around 9:45 p.m., coinciding with the last sighting of lights in the apartment. This witness could not identify physical features due to the obscured and dimly lit area, but confirmed the movement was noticeable enough to draw attention, as the area behind Alyssa's home rarely saw foot traffic at that hour. LAPD recorded this as valuable data because it aligned the light going out with the presence of an unidentified individual. Expanding interviews to farther apartments, a resident 3 houses away recalled seeing a strange man appear multiple times in the week leading up to the disappearance, carrying a large toolbox and appearing to be a service worker, though it was unclear which company. This person did not confirm seeing him on the evening Alyssa vanished, but the information was added to the list of events to verify. LAPD continued checking households along the path leading to the dirt road behind the complex. One witness noted a sound similar to a vehicle door opening and closing around 10 p.m., though they couldn't recall if it was a car, truck, or an echo from farther away. This led police to include the possibility of a vehicle present during the compatible time frame in the list for further analysis. After compiling all statements, LAPD pieced together the timeline. 9:02 p.m. Alyssa contacted her friend. 9:30 p.m. unclear footsteps heard. 9:45 p.m. apartment lights went out. At the same time, a witness saw a figure moving behind the house. Near 10 p.m. sounds related to an unidentified vehicle. Around 11 p.m. the roommate returned and discovered Alyssa missing. This sequence formed the clearest framework police had at the time, pinpointing the likely window of disappearance between 9:30 and 9:50 p.m. However, all information lacked specific identifying details, preventing firm conclusions about Alyssa's direction or circumstances of leaving. LAPD noted that no witness saw Alyssa leave via the front or back door, nor did anyone hear arguing, cries for help, or signs of force being used. The presence of an unidentified individual behind the house exactly when the lights went out was the most noteworthy detail, but it still could not conclude criminal activity due to insufficient supporting information. All statements were documented, with each witness's observation point marked on an area diagram for future analysis. Police concluded the witness collection phase with a relatively complete timeline, but no breakthrough, maintaining the case status as an unusual disappearance, pending new data to determine the next investigative direction. Immediately after completing witness statements from neighboring homes and establishing a relatively clear timeline for when Alyssa Monroe may have disappeared, LAPD proceeded to the next step in handling an unexplained missing person case, organizing a search team covering a 1-mile radius around the residential area, primarily including walking paths, trails, open spaces between apartments, and brush areas leading down the slopes behind the row of houses. The expanded search was conducted late into the night and continued into the following morning, divided into small groups assigned to specific zones to avoid missing critical details. Hollywood Hills complex terrain, with side paths connecting apartments, gentle slopes descending to main roads, and dense vegetation obstructing views, required meticulous and systematic searching. The search team began at the area immediately around Alyssa's apartment and expanded outward in a 1-mile radius. Along the dirt paths behind the house, where a witness reported unusual movement sounds when the apartment lights went out, they carefully checked the ground for signs of abnormal movement or dropped items. After initial sweeps, a small dark object was found near a bush along the path, connecting 2 rows of houses, a piece of fabric of indeterminate shape, torn or ripped along uneven edges. No distinctive marks were on the fabric, but its location fell exactly along the route where a witness reported seeing a figure, so the search team recorded it as the first potential related loose evidence. The fabric was collected per 1991 evidence handling procedures, placed in a paper bag, sealed, numbered, and its position marked on the expanded scene map for later reconstruction of movement paths. Continuing along this path, a second team found another item, a standard Los Angeles public transit bus pass. The pass lay off to the side of the dirt road, as if blown by wind or dropped from someone's pocket while moving. No direct information proved it belonged to Alyssa, but given the low nighttime traffic on this path, the search team documented and collected the evidence per protocol. Both items lacked immediate identifying value, but were flagged as potentially related to an individual's movement during the incident time frame. To ensure nothing was missed, search teams continued thorough checks of surrounding areas, including slope edges leading to main roads, side paths to parking areas, and sections obscured by fences or vegetation. Although no additional items directly linked to the victim were found, locating 2 loose items within the narrow area, reported by witnesses, helped narrow the focus to possible routes of the person present when the lights went out. Discovery locations were marked with stakes and annotated on diagrams, with overall contextual photos taken for positional correlation analysis. This process ensured that if later data on footprints, direction, or vehicles emerged, investigators could reconstruct the detailed sequence. LAPD also noted ground conditions at each point to assess possible wind or animal displacement of traces. At the end of the 1-mile radius, the search team found no additional direct evidence tied to criminal activity or clear victim presence, but the appearance of 2 small items in a confined area helped refine the analysis scope compared to initial estimates. Data from this search phase was entered into reports, combined with the established timeline to prepare for subsequent review and evaluation of possible victim or third-party movement during the disappearance. After completing the 1-mile radius sweep and recovering 2 loose items potentially related to Alyssa Monroe's disappearance, LAPD shifted focus back to the victim's apartment for a Level 2 examination, aiming to assess in greater depth details that the initial check had not fully analyzed. Returning to the scene at this stage was necessary once some peripheral data from the surrounding area existed. Though insufficient to conclude, it was enough to suggest that the likelihood of Alyssa leaving voluntarily without any trace was lower than initially assumed. This investigative team approached the scene with the goal of finding microscopic details that might suggest movement inside the apartment near the time of disappearance. Upon entering, they reviewed the entire apartment layout and began noticing several signs that did not fully align with normal living conditions. A chair near the dining area showed signs of slight displacement, not in its usual position as described by the roommate. The shift was minor, only a few centimeters, but was noted because in missing persons cases, small changes in object placement can sometimes reflect the victim's actions or the presence of another person before disappearance. In addition to the chair, the team recorded faint footprints on the tile floor near the back door. The footprints were unclear in shape, possibly from dust or outdoor dirt tracked in, but their width and blurred outline made determining gender or shoe size impossible. However, their position was relatively noteworthy because they appeared exactly at the back door area, which was found slightly ajar in the first inspection. LAPD immediately cordoned off the back door area to record the door's degree of opening, hinge direction, and whether it had been pushed from inside or pulled from outside. Officers tested recreating the door's position in various states to determine if the opening level on the night of disappearance was consistent with quiet self-exit or a two-person passage. From preliminary assessments, the team found no signs of prying, no scratches, no indications of forced entry or lock tampering. This led to two possibilities. Either the door was opened by Alyssa herself, or by an individual Alyssa allowed into the apartment without leaving clear traces. LAPD entered both possibilities into the record, but could not yet classify the situation as criminal due to no direct supporting evidence. Beyond the back door, the team examined the entire living room, bedroom, and kitchen areas for signs of struggle, such as displaced furniture, dropped or broken items, or clothing personal effects pulled out of place. All they found were minor details that did not form a clear sequence of actions. There were no signs of heavy impact, no loud noises reported by neighbors during the relevant time, and no items damaged or fallen in an unusual manner. This reinforced the assessment that if Alyssa left the apartment that evening, it occurred without a struggle. From this, LAPD evaluated the possibility that Alyssa left quietly on her own or was led away without obvious coercion. To clarify further, the team compared item positions in the apartment with the roommate's description of daily layout: bed neatly made, usual purse on the vanity, favorite jacket still hung in its familiar spot. After completing the Level 2 examination inside the apartment and documenting the minor details regarding the arrangement of items, faint footprints, and the open state of the back door, LAPD moved on to verifying all of Alyssa Monroe's final activities in the period leading up to her disappearance. In order to determine whether the victim had left the home voluntarily, had plans to go somewhere other than the scheduled meeting, or showed any financial signs indicating a change in behavior. The first focus of the verification process was collecting ATM transaction data and bank card activity. LAPD contacted Alyssa's bank to obtain the transaction history for that day, from the morning through after 9 p.m. The results showed that she had withdrawn a small amount of cash at noon from an ATM near her workplace, with no further transactions occurring after she returned home. There were no signs of emergency withdrawals, no unusual payments, and no transactions at gas stations or convenience stores near the apartment complex in the time frame from 8 p.m. to midnight. This indicated that Alyssa had not engaged in any behavior related to preparing to leave the area or travel to a more distant location. Next, the investigative team reviewed film-based cameras at several stores and service stations within the radius around the apartment. Although surveillance systems in 1991 were limited and image quality was low, LAPD still examined every roll of film recorded that evening from the grocery store where Alyssa had stopped in the late afternoon, stores along the main route, and the nearby gas station. Reviewing the film was time-consuming due to the manual process, but the captured frames showed no sign of Alyssa appearing after she returned home. Other individuals who appeared during this time frame were residents or regular customers in the area, and none matched the description provided by any witness regarding a stranger near the apartment that night. LAPD also checked routes and parking areas along the path Alyssa would have taken if she had left home to attend the planned meeting. No camera captured her vehicle leaving the apartment driveway, and no images of other vehicles entering or exiting the area matched the time frame considered relevant to the victim's disappearance. Next, the investigative team verified the location where Alyssa was supposed to meet her friend that evening. They contacted the restaurant where the meeting was scheduled, checked the reservation log, and interviewed staff on duty that night. No one saw Alyssa enter the restaurant, and no customer matched her physical description. The time her friend waited and then left was cross-checked against call log data, allowing police to confirm that the victim never appeared en route to the meeting place. All indicators suggested that Alyssa never left the apartment by personal vehicle and did not walk out to the main road between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. LAPD expanded the verification by checking that day's phone bills to see if the victim had called anyone else after the 9:02 p.m. call. The record showed no outgoing calls after that time, and all incoming calls went unanswered. The sudden cessation of communication further reinforced the assessment that Alyssa had not voluntarily changed her plans. The investigative team also contacted the apartment landlord to verify the lock status, access codes, and any recent maintenance visits in order to assess whether the victim might have had an unexpected appointment with a service provider. No maintenance was scheduled that week, and no technician had visited the apartment according to the landlord's records. When compiling all the data, no ATM transactions, no area camera footage of activity, no appearance at the meeting place, no contact with anyone after returning home, no personal items necessary for leaving taken, LAPD concluded that there was no evidence indicating the victim had voluntarily left the home. Every factor aligned with the scenario that Alyssa remained inside the apartment until the lights went out and afterward took no action that the limited surveillance systems of the time could have recorded. From this, LAPD issued an official conclusion in the report for this phase. There was no evidence that Alyssa left the home voluntarily, and the absence of any preparatory actions, financial transactions, or recorded movements made the likelihood of her leaving of her own free will extremely low. After completing the review of Alyssa Monroe's final activities and determining there was no evidence that the victim left the apartment voluntarily, LAPD shifted to the next step of expanding the terrain search around the residential area with the goal of identifying any possible movement paths, whether of Alyssa or of another individual present near the time the apartment lights went out. The investigative team deployed K9 units to exploit any residual scent left in the backyard, which was adjacent to the back door found slightly ajar during the previous examination. The police dog was first allowed to approach the tiled area inside the back door where faint footprints had been noted, then led outside to the soft soil to determine the scent direction. In the initial minutes, the K9 showed a clear reaction and locked onto a fixed direction, moving from the backyard along the dirt path leading down the slope. The search team followed, marking each segment where the dog displayed a strong signal. This path extended to the intersection between the slope road and a small trail running along the hillside. However, as they neared the turn leading into denser brush, the K9 began losing the scent, changing direction several times before showing no consistent response. The search team recorded this as the scent having been interrupted or diluted due to the open terrain and the characteristic northerly winds in Hollywood Hills at night. The loss of scent at this point led LAPD to mark the entire route from the backyard down the slope to the trail as a priority area on the search map, although it was not yet possible to determine whether it represented the victim's path or that of another individual present around the time of disappearance. Next, LAPD deployed helicopter support from the Air Support Unit to sweep the entire surrounding hillside area, including slopes, secondary trails, thick vegetation, and small ravines often overlooked in ground searches. The helicopter was equipped with high-powered spotlights, however, since advanced infrared technology was not yet available at the time. Observations still relied heavily on natural light conditions and surface reflectivity. The pilot maintained low altitude for optimal visibility, while the observer team marked areas that might require additional ground checks. Despite multiple sweeps within the expanded radius, the spotlights detected no signs of unusual objects, abnormal movement trails, or dropped items potentially related to the victim. Taking advantage of morning light the following day, the search team conducted ground sweeps, guided by the helicopter data. They moved along main trails, checking small crevices between rocks, depressions hidden by tree canopies, and hillside sections where soft soil might retain traces. However, no additional evidence was found, no drag marks, no fresh shoe prints, no personal items, and no fragments related to Alyssa's clothing. The team also examined trails leading down to the residential area at the base of the hill, where some routes connected directly to low-traffic streets. No witnesses reported the appearance of strangers or unusual vehicle activity during the time frame of the victim's disappearance, and the lack of further ground traces made it difficult for LAPD to form a specific hypothesis about the next direction of movement from the point where the K9 lost the scent. During the sweep, the search team marked every checked area on the map to ensure systematic coverage and avoid duplicated efforts. Some rugged hillside sections were examined more closely because the possibility of someone moving through them at night was low but could not be entirely ruled out. However, these areas also yielded no new findings. When compiling the full results of the expanded terrain search, LAPD noted that, although most of the area around the apartment within a 1-mile radius had been covered and extended down connecting trails, all data converged on one ambiguous point: loss of scent on the slope behind the house without corroborating physical evidence. There were no signs of struggle or scattered items typically associated with forced circumstances, nor any indication the victim had left of her own accord. The lack of additional evidence led the investigative team to conclude that the expanded search effort had reached its limit under the current conditions, and the only result obtained was confirmation that the area behind the apartment was the site of movement coinciding with the time of disappearance. But insufficient data existed to reconstruct the specific sequence of events. After completing the expanded search around the hillside and obtaining no additional evidence or clear signs indicating Alyssa Monroe's direction of movement after the scent was lost, LAPD moved to the next step in the missing persons protocol, compiling a list of persons of interest, POI, based on their level of contact with the victim, their schedule on the day in question, and their activity range near the apartment in the period before and after the lights went out. The purpose of creating the POI list was not to designate anyone as a suspect, but to narrow down individuals who might provide information or have indirect connections to the disappearance. The first group placed on the list consisted of those closest to Alyssa, including her ex-boyfriend, close friends, and several co-workers she had interacted with during the week. LAPD contacted Alyssa's ex-boyfriend to verify his whereabouts during the time of disappearance. He stated he had not spoken with Alyssa that day and provided evidence of being at home the evening of the incident. The corroborating data matched, so he was cleared from active suspicion, but remained on the list for potential follow-up verification. Several of Alyssa's co-workers were interviewed to gather information about any recent conflicts, arguments, or personal issues that might have caused her to leave home in an unstable state. All confirmed that Alyssa showed no unusual signs of stress, worked normally on her last day, and shared no information about sudden plans. LAPD recorded the results, but gained no new leads. Next, police expanded the POI list to individuals living or working near the apartment complex, especially those present in the time frame close to the disappearance. Based on witness statements collected earlier, one resident reported seeing a strange man appear multiple times in the week prior, carrying a large toolbox consistent with a service technician. While the information was insufficient for identification, it was significant enough for LAPD to check service companies that had operated near the area. They reviewed lists of HVAC providers and general residential repair companies commonly active around Hollywood Hills. In this review, one name matched the witness's observation: Derek Malden, an HVAC technician assigned to perform several maintenance jobs in the area a few blocks from Alyssa's apartment. Initial information showed that Derek had been in the vicinity during the week of the disappearance to carry out an air conditioning maintenance contract for an apartment on the lower hillside street. LAPD added Derek's name to the POI list because his presence in the area aligned with the vague description of a man carrying a large toolbox. However, Since there was no evidence that Derek had ever visited Alyssa's apartment or had contact with her, police could not yet open a suspect file. Instead, they placed him in the group of subjects requiring basic verification of his schedule, work hours, and movements on the evening of the incident. Concurrently, LAPD continued reviewing a range of individuals who could have come into contact with Alyssa, neighbors in the same building, delivery personnel whose routes passed near the home, and people who had contacted her in the 2 days before the disappearance. Each individual was added to the POI list at varying priority levels based on the recency of contact and the likelihood of their presence within the radius around the apartment at the time of disappearance. Police categorized the POIs into 3 groups: those with clear personal relationships to the victim, those with occupational activity near the area, and those unknown to her but appearing in the relevant timeline. The list was created to support subsequent cross-referencing, in-depth interviews, and data comparison. LAPD also checked service orders in the residential area to see if any repair, maintenance, or delivery personnel had been present but unrecorded. Most companies reported no unscheduled activity during that time, except for a few brief visits to unrelated apartments. When compiling everything, the most prominent name among the unknown individuals appearing near the area remained Derek Malden. Although the data on him was still limited to regional activity information and a preliminary visual match based on witness description, LAPD noted this detail as a point to monitor. At the conclusion of the POI list compilation phase, police still lacked sufficient grounds to open an official suspect file, as there was no direct physical evidence or clear trace linking anyone on the list to criminal activity. The POI list was regarded only as an organizational tool to ensure that all individuals with any potential connection, direct or indirect, were evaluated and cross-checked according to standard procedure. After completing the POI list compilation and documenting individuals who could have direct or indirect connections to the area where Alyssa Monroe lived at the time of her disappearance, LAPD continued analyzing one of the few physical pieces of evidence present in the area surrounding the apartment: tire tracks found on the dirt road behind the house, located at the intersection between the route the K9 unit had followed and the trail leading down the hillside. In the context of a lack of specific evidence related to coercion or victim movement, every minor detail within the activity radius needed to be evaluated for its highest potential to provide leads, and tire tracks represented one such form of data. The investigative team returned to the tire track location in early morning light to ensure the ground had not been further disturbed by residents or passing vehicles. There, they took photographs, measured dimensions, determined tread depth, and recorded the soil surface characteristics to analyze the vehicle's likely load weight. The tire tracks were not excessively deep, indicating an average weight vehicle, most likely a light truck or small pickup, rather than a large commercial vehicle. The tread pattern was partially clear, sufficient to identify a general group of patterns, but not enough to pinpoint a specific brand or model year. The technical team classified the tread as belonging to a type commonly used on vehicles from the late 1980s to early 1990s, more typical for light-duty trucks than standard passenger cars. Based on this characteristic, LAPD hypothesized that the vehicle present in the area near the time of disappearance could have belonged to a resident, a service vehicle, or an individual who appeared in the area without being documented. After completing on-site data collection, LAPD converted the tire tracks into a reference sample for comparison against the database of registered vehicles in the surrounding area, including vehicles belonging to households in the 2 nearest rows of houses and those frequently seen according to witness information. This list included the roommate's car, neighboring residents' vehicles, cars of some visitors to the area, and vehicles of POIs such as recent friends or acquaintances who had visited Alyssa's home. However, after cross-referencing, none of the tires on these vehicles matched the tread pattern obtained from the dirt road. This prompted LAPD to expand the comparison to vehicles registered in a broader area, within a radius of several blocks, to determine whether the tire tracks might belong to a vehicle that regularly used the dirt road behind the houses. The results were similar. No registered vehicle in the area had tires matching the scene pattern. In the next step, LAPD checked the vehicle lists of service companies that had been active in the area that week, including delivery trucks, municipal maintenance vehicles, and HVAC technician vehicles. Several service company trucks were reviewed, but their tire patterns belonged to newer models or had distinctly different grooves. None matched sufficiently to warrant suspicion. At this stage, the investigative team paid particular attention to the HVAC technicians' vehicles due to the witness information about a man carrying a large toolbox. However, when checking registered vehicles under the names of technicians operating near the area, whether company-owned or personally registered, no tire patterns matched the type in question. Several dehumidifier trucks, plumbing repair vehicles, and light delivery vans were also checked but were ruled out. The entire expanded tire comparison process yielded no direct matches. This led to the conclusion that the vehicle leaving the tire tracks might belong to an individual not residing in the area, not a customer or acquaintance of nearby households, or a vehicle not registered locally that only appeared temporarily on the evening of the disappearance. When combining the tire track data with previously collected information, LAPD still could not establish any connection between the vehicle type and any listed POI. There was no evidence indicating that the vehicle present near the time of disappearance was directly related to Alyssa or to her leaving the home. No accompanying physical evidence was found near the tire tracks to support a hypothesis of coercion or vehicle-assisted movement. The investigative team concluded that the current tire track data was insufficient to advance the analysis process. Although the tire tracks were noted as one of the rare details appearing near a potentially relevant movement route, the full results of the analysis showed no basis for using this trace to narrow the scope of suspicion or clarify events at the time the victim disappeared. The lack of a match caused LAPD to classify the tire tracks as data that could not be ruled out as relevant, but also lacked sufficient directional value, thereby forcing the investigation to continue relying on other data groups to seek progress. After completing the tire track analysis and finding no matches with registered vehicles in the area or with service vehicles that had appeared around the row of houses, LAPD entered the phase of reevaluating everything collected throughout the initial investigation process into Alyssa Monroe's disappearance. At this point, the apartment scene provided only very limited details, furnishings largely undisturbed, back door slightly ajar, faint footprints of undetermined origin, no signs of struggle, and no evidence indicating coercion. The items recovered outside, including the piece of fabric and bus pass, were located in open space where many people could have passed, making it difficult to establish their degree of relevance. The expanded canine search only identified a scent direction down the slope before losing it, while helicopter sweeps of the hillside and trails detected no additional objects to narrow movement hypotheses. The recorded tire tracks also failed to produce new connections, as no vehicle with matching tread patterns was found despite comparisons with residents' cars, the victim's acquaintances, technician vehicles, and delivery company vehicles. There was no indication that the vehicle was one belonging to someone who knew Alyssa or had been in the area at the time of disappearance, beyond the single faint tire impression on the ground. When compiling all the data, LAPD recognized that none of the current details had sufficient strength to create a breakthrough in investigative direction. Witnesses provided only vague observations about sounds, a shadowy figure, and the appearance of a man with a toolbox, without being able to identify appearance, exact timing, or any connection to Alyssa. The POI list included the ex-boyfriend, co-workers, neighbors, and a few individuals active in the area, but none had evidence of contact with Alyssa near the time of disappearance. Checks of financial history, transactions, communication activity, and film-based camera data also showed no recorded travel, purchases, or social contacts after 9:02 p.m., making voluntary departure from the home highly unlikely. However, The absence of coercion evidence prevented LAPD from upgrading the case to a criminal investigation. This placed the case in a gray area of operational procedure, clear signs of abnormality at the time of disappearance, yet a complete lack of direct or indirect evidence indicating that a crime had occurred. Based on regulations and limited resources in the context of crime in Los Angeles in 1991, missing persons cases without evidence of violence were typically not prioritized unless new circumstances emerged. An internal assessment report was prepared to summarize the early-stage investigation progress, clearly listing collected evidence, witness statements, area movement data, search results, and tire track analysis. The report concluded that there was no reasonable basis to continue expanding the investigation in any specific direction, as no hypothesis had been sufficiently supported by evidence to justify deploying additional resources. At the same time, there was no sign that the victim had left home to go elsewhere on her own, but the lack of criminal evidence still prevented LAPD from reclassifying the case. Unable to elevate the matter to criminal investigation status, the responsible team was forced to transfer the file to low-priority missing status, meaning continued retention and monitoring, but without maintaining active investigative resources. The file was moved to passive follow-up status, updated only if new witnesses, new evidence, or related reports appeared. This meant that expanded search operations gradually wound down, hillside sweep teams were reassigned to other cases, and no further daily scene checks occurred. Alyssa's apartment was returned to the family after all necessary documentation steps were completed, while the scene diagrams, search maps, and POI list remained stored in the central file for use if new developments arose. The lack of specific progress meant no investigative direction was prioritized, and Alyssa Monroe's disappearance officially entered a stalled phase. Nearly 2 years after Alyssa Monroe's missing persons file had been placed in a stalled status and transferred to passive handling, another incident occurred in the city of Glenview, a suburb of Chicago, bearing characteristics that caused local authorities to raise many questions about its nature, although at the time, no one considered it to have any connection to the Los Angeles case. The victim, Tiffany Reyes, 20 years old, disappeared on an autumn evening in 1993 while walking from the garage into the house, a short distance of just a few dozen steps that became her last confirmed movement. According to the sequence of events, Tiffany had just returned from work around 8:45 p.m., driving into her attached garage located beside the house. Tiffany's home was a typical single-story suburban house in the Chicago area, with direct access from the garage to the kitchen door and surrounded by a front yard and spacious backyard, without high fencing or modern security systems. A neighbor across the street recalled seeing Tiffany drive home, her headlights illuminating the road in front of the house, followed by the sound of the garage door closing. However, from that point onward, no one saw her appear at the kitchen door or any other window in the house. When the family discovered Tiffany was not inside the house about an hour after the car had entered the garage, they immediately checked the garage area and found the vehicle still there, with the keys in her purse on the passenger seat. The door from the garage into the house remained locked from the inside as normal, and there were no signs that the victim had entered the house or left by another route. Tiffany's disappearance over such a short distance drew special attention from local police, as there was no apparent reason for her to stop between the garage and the kitchen door. They conducted a full check of the surrounding area that same night. The garage floor showed no signs of struggle, no overturned objects. The victim's purse contained all her belongings, and the landline phone in the house had no outgoing calls during the relevant time frame. The fact that the car was neatly parked in the garage and the garage door had been closed indicated that the victim had completed the initial phase of entering the house, but the disappearance occurred immediately afterward, without leaving any clear signs of coercion. Police examined the door frame, hinges, lock, and wooden trim leading from the garage to the kitchen. Everything was intact with no signs of forceful impact. This made determining the sequence of events extremely difficult, because if the victim had been attacked, there would have been at least some sign of coercive action. Conversely, If she had left voluntarily, there would need to be evidence of her opening a door or exiting via a side route, but nothing at the scene supported this hypothesis. While searching the backyard and adjacent areas, the investigative team discovered a small but noteworthy detail due to its similarity to characteristics in certain rare missing persons cases: a faint shoe print on damp soil near the low fence at the back of the house. The shoe print pointed toward the brush area, with no clear starting or ending point because the ground did not retain a pristine shape, but the size and proportions of the print were quite distinctive. Upon measurement, police determined the shoe print size corresponded to the range commonly recorded for adult males. The outline shape and heel structure matched patterns previously seen in Alyssa Monroe's disappearance case. A conclusion that at the time was simply noted as a technical similarity, without deeper investigative significance, because there was no reason to connect two cases in different states. Nevertheless, the shoe print was collected and entered into the scene file as reference data. The absence of any signs of lock tampering, resistance, or coercion forced Glenview police to consider various possibilities. The victim may have been approached while opening the door from the garage to the house. She may have heard a noise and turned around before stepping inside, or she may have left the garage for some reason but failed to enter the house before the incident occurred. Despite the hypotheses raised, none received support from the scene due to the complete lack of physical evidence. There were no dropped items, no drag marks, no unusual mud trails leading from the yard into the house. Police also found no evidence related to Tiffany's movement from the moment the car stopped until she disappeared. When sweeping a wider area, including the rear road, neighboring yards, and small walking paths connecting to the street, they found no additional shoe prints or any personal items belonging to the victim. Tiffany's disappearance over a distance of just a few dozen steps quickly led to the case being recorded as an unusual disappearance. In the compiled scene report, Glenview police clearly noted three key elements. The victim disappeared immediately after closing the garage door. There were no signs of vandalism or coercion, and a faint shoe print in the backyard had size and shape similarities to a pattern from a prior missing persons case, although at this point there was no basis to prove any connection between the two incidents. The case was therefore recorded as a disappearance without clear investigative anchors, and the lack of evidence forced authorities to keep the file in a waiting status for new information. After completing the scene documentation and identifying the key elements in Tiffany Reyes's disappearance, Glenview PD expanded the investigation scope to individuals residing in the surrounding area and those who appeared within close proximity to the victim's home near the time of disappearance. During the review of residency records, police quickly focused on information about an HVAC technician named Derek Malden, who lived just 3 blocks from Tiffany's house, on the same street leading to the rear turn of the residential area, where a section of soft soil had recorded a faint shoe print. Derek was added to the list of individuals requiring verification, not because of direct evidence, but due to the nature of his profession, which involved frequent movement in the area, and because he had provided air conditioning repair services to several nearby apartments in the month prior to Tiffany's disappearance. Glenview PD arranged an interview with Derek to clarify his schedule and level of presence around the victim's home. In the interview, Derek confirmed that he had been in the neighborhood on days prior to the disappearance to complete contracted maintenance rounds, but he asserted that he did not work or appear in the area on the evening Tiffany vanished. Police requested a detailed work schedule from Derek, including the locations he visited in the week leading up to the incident and a list of clients he had serviced. Derek provided fairly consistent information. Most of his time was spent working in the southern part of Glenview, and he had only passed through the street near Tiffany's home twice that week at the company's direction. Glenview PD cross-checked the schedule with the HVAC service company Derek worked for and found that the timing and locations aligned with his statements. Nevertheless, they considered the possibility that Derek might have been in the area at times not covered by his official work schedule. Police continued questioning him about the vehicle he used. He stated that he drove an older model light-duty truck, but the tire description he provided did not match the tread pattern of the shoe print or any tire tracks previously found in the vicinity of the victim's home. Glenview PD inspected Derek's vehicle and confirmed that the tire type did not match the faint shoe print in the backyard, which had been documented based on its relatively distinct heel structure and surface characteristics. In addition, Derek provided an alibi that he was at home at the time of the disappearance. This evidence included information from a roommate who stated that Derek had been at the apartment for most of the evening and did not leave after 8 p.m. There was no physical clue indicating that Derek was near the scene when Tiffany stepped from the garage into the house. Glenview PD further checked whether Derek had any conflict with the victim or any personal motive that could lead to criminal behavior, but there was absolutely no information suggesting the two knew each other. Derek's presence in the area was solely related to the nature of his job, and no record showed that he had ever had direct contact with Tiffany. Based on the information gathered, Glenview PD assessed that Derek could not be considered a suspect and was only an individual whose whereabouts required verification. With no physical evidence linking Derek to the scene or the victim, and with his statements consistent with company HVAC data, police had no grounds to detain him. The interview report on Derek was completed and filed as a supplementary section in Tiffany Reyes's missing persons file as an item of information to be retained, but lacking sufficient weight to serve as a primary investigative direction. When compiling the case report, Glenview PD noted that the faint shoe print had a size similar to one recorded in a missing persons case in another state 2 years earlier. But because data at that time had not been fully digitized, and there was no formal basis for connecting files across states, this detail was only retained as an operational note. In accordance with procedure, Glenview PD sent a memo notifying LAPD of the appearance of an HVAC technician in the area near the time of disappearance, in case information about the profession or Derek's presence might hold value in other files previously handled in California. However, when the memo reached LAPD, it was classified as insufficient connection because no element proved that Tiffany had ever been to California or had any relationship with any subject in Los Angeles. In the context of the early 1990s, when there was no comprehensive federal data linking technology, information about Derek was placed in the notes category, but not pursued further. Glenview PD's file recorded that the verification process for Derek had been completed, and he was cleared from active suspicion. Tiffany Reyes's disappearance case thereafter remained in the category of cases lacking physical evidence and investigative direction, producing no new progress after the verification of nearby residents was completed. By 2005, more than a decade after Alyssa Monroe's disappearance in Los Angeles, and nearly 12 years after Tiffany Reyes vanished in Glenview, another disappearance occurred in the city of El Monte in Los Angeles County. With characteristics that drew the attention of local authorities due to the level of similarity to the two prior cases, although at that time there was no sufficiently robust data system to suggest a possible connection. The victim this time was Carmen Delgado, 28 years old, living in a ground-floor apartment in a small complex on the edge of the city, an area populated mostly by young families and blue-collar workers. On the evening of the incident, Carmen was last seen returning home around 9 p.m. after her shift at a grocery store. A neighbor in the same row confirmed seeing her enter the front yard of the apartment with a small bag of groceries, unlock the door, step inside, and close the door as usual. During this period, no unusual events were noted. No arguing, no impacts, no signs of a stranger's presence. However, the next morning, Carmen's coworker notified the manager that she had not shown up for her 6 a.m. shift and was not answering any calls. The manager contacted the family, and the family immediately went to the apartment to check on her. When they arrived, the front door was locked, the windows were closed tight, and there were no signs of forced entry. They knocked repeatedly, but received no response. The family then asked the building management to assist in opening the door with a spare key to verify whether Carmen was inside. When the door was opened, everything in the apartment was nearly undisturbed. Furnishings were not displaced. There were no signs of rummaging or broken items. The grocery bag the neighbor had seen the previous evening was still on the kitchen table, unopened. The phone was on the table. Carmen's shoes were near the entrance, and there was no indication she had left the home after entering. The kitchen had no pots or unfinished food. The bedroom was tidy, bedding intact. This indicated that Carmen had disappeared only minutes or tens of minutes after closing the apartment door the previous evening. The initial report from El Monte PD noted no signs of struggle inside the home, no blood, no evidence of coercion, and all locking points on the front door remained intact. The family affirmed that Carmen did not have a habit of going out late at night, much less any reason to leave immediately after arriving home. While checking the surrounding area, an officer discovered the only piece of evidence, a light blue cotton sock lying in the backyard of the apartment, near the path leading to the building's shared trash area. The sock did not belong to Carmen's family, as confirmed by them, and its location was unusual because the area was not a main walkway and saw little foot traffic. The evidence was collected per protocol, packaged in a paper bag, numbered, and its exact position recorded on the area diagram. No other evidence near the sock or in the backyard suggested a struggle or forceful movement. There were no clear footprints in the soil, no dropped items, and no signs that anyone had climbed over the low fence separating the yard from the rear property. El Monte PD evaluated the case characteristics and recognized a similar pattern to two other disappearances recorded in the 1990s. The victim vanished inside or immediately adjacent to what was considered the safest space, with no physical traces of coercion, no indication the victim left voluntarily, and the scene left in an orderly state. However, at that time, the two prior cases occurred in different jurisdictions, and there was no interstate or intercity database to link them, so Carmen's disappearance continued to be handled as an isolated event. Investigators continued analyzing the light blue cotton sock, but could only document its material and degree of wear. No direct identifying information came from the evidence. The garage area, front path, rear path, and hallway showed no physical signs to narrow the time frame of the incident beyond the neighbor's sighting of Carmen entering the home the previous evening. The fact that the victim disappeared in a quiet setting, with no signs of lock tampering or struggle, and only one external piece of evidence left behind, forced El Monte PD to record the case pattern as similar to other difficult-to-solve disappearances, yet they could not pursue a deeper investigation due to the lack of specific evidentiary foundation. Carmen Delgado's missing persons file was established, the evidence was sealed, and the area was fully photographed for archiving, but the investigation quickly reached a dead end when no new witnesses or additional information emerged. The scene characteristics indicated that the incident occurred over a short period, without noise and without producing signs strong enough to attract the attention of surrounding residents. El Monte PD concluded its report by noting that the case pattern aligned with previously recorded unexplained disappearances, although at that time, there was no official basis to establish any connection. Immediately after recovering the light blue cotton sock from the backyard of Carmen Delgado's apartment, the Forensics Division of El Monte PD processed and packaged the evidence according to the updated 2005 procedures, which had become significantly more standardized than in the early 1990s. The sock was sealed in a compressed paper evidence bag to prevent moisture condensation and assigned a unique code for storage in a temperature-controlled evidence vault. During the initial examination, forensic technicians discovered several fine fibers adhering to the inner surface of the sock, including light-colored synthetic fibers and some interspersed dark microfibers. Since the scene provided no other evidence, these fibers became the most significant component in efforts to build a forensic picture of the disappearance. The Forensics Division used optical microscopy and fiber structure analysis for classification. The majority of the fibers were polyester and nylon, common types found in household upholstery, carpets, or clothing fabrics. However, a small group of fibers exhibited relatively distinctive color and sheen characteristics that did not match typical samples collected at the scene. Recognizing the potential investigative value of the fibers, the Forensics Division isolated this group and sealed it separately for further analysis. In 2005, While material forensics had not yet reached the sophistication of later decades, infrared spectroscopy and morphological comparison methods could still determine the chemical properties and production origins of fibers to a certain extent. The analysis results showed that the distinctive fiber group belonged to a blended polypropylene synthetic fiber type commonly used in truck bed liners or trunk liners of certain civilian vehicle models, popular from the early 1990s to 2000. This finding prompted investigators to question whether the fibers came from inside a vehicle that had contact with the victim or from clothing worn by someone who handled the sock before it appeared in the backyard. To verify this possibility, El Monte PD collected control fiber samples from multiple sources in the area, hallway carpets in the apartment complex, the trunk liner of Carmen's family vehicle, fabric samples from clothing the victim commonly wore, and fibers from the apartment carpet. None matched the distinctive fiber group. Police expanded collection to fiber samples from vehicles of nearby residents, as well as vehicles that had been parked around the complex during the week of the incident. Results showed a variety of fiber types, but none matched the chemical properties, sheen and color tone of the fibers recovered from the sock. The lack of a match led the investigative team to consider that the fibers may have originated from a vehicle or individual not regularly present at the building. However, El Monte PD lacked a log of vehicles entering the complex on the night of the incident, as no security cameras recorded entry activity at that time. This made tracing the fiber origin nearly impossible. At the same time, the Forensics Division attempted to check whether the fibers could have come from trash collection vehicles or service personnel passing through. However, the company responsible for trash collection in the area used vehicles with rough gray interior fibers that did not match the recovered group. When comparisons were extended to fibers from fire department vehicles, police vehicles, or commercial trucks frequently moving through the area, the results still produced no matches. Since there was no national microfiber database in 2005, the fiber analysis results could only be documented in terms of characteristics and could not clearly identify a vehicle type or manufacturer. Forensic technicians noted that the fiber group could belong to many older model pickup trucks and civilian vehicles common in the 1990s, making the scope of suspicion too broad to apply to specific suspect identification. The lack of a match meant that although the fiber was the only piece of evidence, it could not provide directional information or narrow down suspects. El Monte PD had to record this evidence as potential data, but not yet usable in the investigative process. In addition, the similarity in case pattern between Carmen's case and the two prior disappearances, victim vanishing without trace inside or near their residence, no struggle, no lock tampering, and only a single external piece of evidence left behind, was noted in the summary report. But no formal connection was established due to the lack of direct forensic links. When compiling all the data, El Monte PD concluded that the recovered fiber had been handled according to proper procedure and fully analyzed to the technical capability of 2005, but still failed to produce progress. The case file therefore entered a stalled status similar to many missing persons files, lacking strong evidence, and the fiber, despite its importance, was retained only in the evidence vault, awaiting any future opportunity for comparison when new technology or data became available. In 2008, the first case involving a surviving victim who escaped a kidnapping occurred in Pasadena, becoming the single most important data point since the three previous unsolved disappearances. The victim, Alyssa Hart, 26 years old, a laboratory technician at a medical center near Pasadena City College, was reported missing on an evening in late April after finishing her shift around 9 p.m. According to her coworkers, she left the parking lot in a normal state, drove out the gate, and showed no signs of being followed. However, just a few hours later, around 1 a.m. the next morning, police received a call from a resident living near an abandoned industrial area, more than 3 miles from the initial scene. The caller reported that a young woman, in a state of panic, missing her shoes, and with minor injuries, had appeared at his door, asking for help. The woman was Alyssa Hart. After being taken to the hospital and stabilized psychologically, Alyssa stated that she had been suddenly attacked from behind by a man while locking her car door. He covered her mouth, bound her hands with thin nylon cord, and pushed her into the back seat of a dark-colored pickup truck. She could not clearly see the license plate, but she noted a strong chemical smell coming from the truck bed, a smell like refrigerant that she had previously encountered in the technical room at her workplace. Melissa recalled being taken to a metal garage, not a residential house, but something resembling a maintenance structure or storage facility. Walls were steel panels, the floor was rough concrete, and inside there were long metal pipes, an industrial fan system, and numerous mechanical tools placed on racks. During her captivity, she heard metal objects clanging together and the sound of a metal lid being opened, similar to a storage drum. Melissa also described a very distinct freon smell, strong enough to make breathing difficult. According to forensic investigators, this smell commonly appears in environments involving repair or replacement of air conditioning systems, especially older models that still used pre-regulation freon generations before environmental restrictions tightened. When she identified an opportunity to escape, Melissa recounted that her attacker temporarily left the garage to retrieve tools. Because the nylon cord binding her hands had loosened from her continuously twisting her wrists, Melissa managed to untie the knot and found a rear door in the garage, made of metal panels, secured with a simple latch bar. She opened the latch, ran across the dirt yard, and crossed a patch of brush to reach the main road. The most important detail was that, while escaping, Melissa deliberately kept the segment of nylon cord still caught on her wrist and later handed it over to police. This was the first piece of evidence that could be directly analyzed in a series of events with a pattern very similar to the 3 previous cases. The forensics division quickly worked with the cord sample and determined it belonged to a type of commercial binding cord commonly used in the HVAC industry, including air conditioning maintenance, piping installation, and securing equipment during transport. This nylon fiber type had a distinctive structure and rarely appeared in everyday civilian activities. At the same time, the freon smell Melissa described also pointed to a work environment related to refrigeration and air conditioning. Upon arriving at the location where the victim had appeared, police gathered additional observations from the surrounding area. In the open space near the road, they found numerous small metal fragments, scrap from old refrigeration equipment, several segments of rigid plastic tubing, and faint oil streaks on the ground, consistent with compressor oil used in cooling units. In addition, the terrain assessment showed that this abandoned industrial area had once housed a row of small service garages, most of which had ceased operations since the late 1990s and currently had no surveillance camera systems. Local records indicated that some of these garages had been registered for residential and commercial air conditioning repair, prompting investigators to question whether an individual might be exploiting the area to carry out unlawful detentions. Melissa described her attacker as tall, muscular, wearing gloves, carrying the smell of machine oil, and having breath mixed with chemicals, consistent with someone who regularly worked in technical maintenance fields. She did not clearly see his face due to the sudden attack and the low light in the garage. However, the most consistent details in her statement, the freon smell, HVAC specific nylon cord, metal garage structure, and sounds from specialized tools, were regarded as the first group of physical evidence capable of directly linking to the perpetrator's occupation. Investigators reinforced the assessment that this could be a kidnapping carried out by an individual with knowledge and experience in the HVAC field, or a comparable technical trade. The Melissa Hart case, the first in a sequence spanning nearly 2 decades to produce a surviving victim, provided concrete, clear physical evidence sufficient to raise suspicion that the pattern of the 3 prior disappearances might be connected. Approaching the victim in a private setting, no signs of struggle, rapid disappearance within a narrow time window, and the presence of materials related to the air conditioning technical field. Melissa's survival therefore became the single most important factor, enabling investigators to obtain leads consistent with the occupational context of a perpetrator capable of moving between multiple areas over an extended period. After compiling all information from the 3 unsolved disappearances in 1991, 1993, and 2005, along with the failed 2008 kidnapping with surviving victim Melissa Hart, investigators began constructing a behavioral profile with the goal of identifying the type of perpetrator capable of carrying out a multi-year series of similar pattern events. The profiling was conducted by a federal criminal analysis team assisting LAPD based on forensic data, witness statements, loose physical evidence, and Melissa's survival behavior inside the metal garage. At the outset, the analysis team examined the clearest common thread. All 4 cases involved the disappearance of young women in environments considered safe: residential neighborhoods, private home garages, or personal apartments, with no signs of struggle, forced entry, or loud noises. This indicated the perpetrator's ability to approach the target very quickly, subdue suddenly, and control the victim in an extremely short time frame. The speed of approach and withdrawal from the scene was the core element shaping his pattern. Based on Melissa's identification of HVAC-specific nylon cord, the freon smell, and the garage structure containing numerous air conditioning-related equipment, the analysis team concluded that the perpetrator was very likely from a technical trade, specifically HVAC, or a closely related field, such as refrigeration equipment, maintenance, gas piping installation, or compressor repair. The use of industry-specific materials to restrain the victim showed familiarity with tools, precision handling, and knowledge of which materials were suitable for binding without creating noise. Additionally, the strong freon smell inside the garage, where Melissa was held, suggested frequent exposure to older refrigerants, R12 or R22 types, common in air conditioning systems from the 1980s to the early 2000s. This reinforced the assessment that his occupation was directly tied to maintenance or collection of used air conditioning equipment, an environment rich in metal materials, machine oil, piping, and compressors, all of which appeared in the surviving victim's description. The second element in the profile was the perpetrator's likely use of a small truck or pickup as both transportation and victim transport vehicle. The tire tracks in the 1991 case did not match any local resident vehicles. The faint shoe print in the 1993 case indicated the presence of an adult male, and the light blue cotton sock in the 2005 El Monte case appeared in a low-traffic area. All suggested the perpetrator used a vehicle to approach the victim after observing the environment long enough to identify the optimal moment. A truck or pickup was a logical choice because it attracted little attention in residential areas, had a cargo area spacious enough to restrain a victim without exposing traces externally, and aligned with a technical occupation that required transporting tools and materials. The third element was the pattern of rapid kidnapping with minimal trace left behind. The perpetrator demonstrated clear understanding of the victim's reaction time limits and the ability to observe the environment prior to acting. In all 3 disappearance cases, the victims vanished within very short windows. Alyssa immediately after the lights went out, Tiffany between the garage and kitchen door, Carmen only minutes after entering the house. In Melissa's case, the rear approach while the victim was locking her car showed the perpetrator chose a moment when the target was off guard and unable to call for help. The minimal evidence at the scenes indicated deliberate calculation to avoid leaving biological or material traces. This was the behavior of an individual with practical experience in environments requiring clean material handling or knowledge of how to avoid clear fingerprints or shoe prints. The fourth element in the profile was the use of a secondary location for holding or processing victims. Through Melissa's description, the metal garage in the abandoned industrial area served as an intermediate site, meaning the perpetrator did not act immediately at the abduction point. This explained why initial scenes in the prior disappearances showed no struggle signs. The perpetrator moved the victim to a separate location where he had full control and avoided being seen. Choosing an abandoned industrial area demonstrated familiarity with the terrain, knowledge of activity schedules, and awareness of areas without cameras or witnesses. This was typically characteristic of someone who worked mobile jobs, moved between multiple points in the city, and habitually observed old infrastructure. The analysis team also noted the perpetrator's increasing confidence over time, from completely silent disappearances to the Melissa case, where he took greater risk by holding the victim in a garage that was not fully sealed. However, the consistent matches in occupation, vehicle, restraint method, and secondary location choice led the analysis team to conclude that the perpetrator was very likely someone who frequently moved between residential and industrial areas, possessed relatively high technical skills, used specialized industry tools as crime implements, and maintained a rapid kidnapping pattern over many years. The initial profile therefore described the perpetrator as an adult male with an occupation related to HVAC or refrigeration engineering, driving a civilian truck, highly familiar with local terrain, and capable of preparing secondary scenes to conceal criminal activity. After completing the behavioral profile and establishing the likelihood that the perpetrator belonged to the HVAC trade based on Melissa Hart's statement, LAPD's forensic investigation team began re-examining all retained evidence from unsolved cases, particularly the 2005 Carmen Delgado disappearance, to search for any chemical or technical connections that could support the hypothesis of a single perpetrator operating across many years. The most significant evidence from the El Monte case was the group of synthetic fibers recovered from the light blue cotton sock, which had been preliminarily analyzed in 2005 and identified as polypropylene blended with minor components, but stalled due to the absence of matching samples. When compared with new data from the Melissa case, especially the HVAC-specific nylon cord sample the victim brought during her escape, forensic technicians decided to conduct deeper analysis using FTIR infrared spectroscopy and polymer structure comparison. The 2008 nylon cord sample was sectioned, surface cleaned, and placed in the spectrometer to analyze composition and bonding type. The results showed the nylon cord belonged to an industrial product line used for securing refrigerant lines and compressors in residential air conditioning systems. Notably, the nylon polymer contained heat-resistant and abrasion-resistant additives, chemical groups commonly used in HVAC tools from the late 1980s to early 1990s. When the forensics team compared the nylon cord's polymer spectrum with that of the fibers from the 2005 cotton sock, they discovered a clear similarity. Both samples carried the same chemical signatures related to a distinctive polymer group used in liners of older HVAC service truck carpets. This polymer type had a structure no longer common in the market after 1994 due to changes in manufacturing regulations and technological improvements. The fact that two pieces of evidence, separated by 3 years, matched in this distinctive polymer and degree of wear, suggested they not only came from the same product group, but were highly likely from the same source or the same type of vehicle equipped with similar materials. To strengthen the conclusion, the forensics team requested comparison with the National Polymer Sample Repository, including data from truck carpet manufacturers, HVAC binding cord producers, and older piping lines. The results confirmed that the combination of hardened particle-blended polypropylene and technical nylon with this specific additive ratio appeared almost exclusively in two product lines: technical service truck floor liners, manufactured by a Texas company in 1989, and HVAC equipment, securing cords from a small Arizona manufacturer, distributed between 1989 and 1990. This made random coincidence nearly impossible. If the 2005 sock fibers and the 2008 nylon cord both originated from 1989-1990 HVAC product lines, investigators could conclude that the perpetrator in both cases had used the same material type, the same tool category, and very likely the same occupational vehicle over many years. The next confirmation step relied on microfiber wear levels. The 2005 fibers showed signs of long-term frictional contact with metal surfaces, while the 2008 nylon cord exhibited clean-cut marks consistent with being taken from a standard repair spool. This similarity clarified that both samples not only came from the same material type, but had been used under similar working conditions. The analysis team argued that the perpetrator had likely used truck carpet as flooring during victim transport or equipment movement, causing fibers to transfer to the cotton sock at the El Monte scene. By 2008, he continued using nylon cord from the same material line in the Melissa kidnapping. Both belonged to 1989-1990 HVAC-era materials, strongly supporting the hypothesis of a perpetrator with long-term industry experience, using outdated equipment and maintaining an unchanged operational style. When compiling the polymer analysis, the forensics team presented the conclusion that the probability of the two samples originating from unrelated sources was extremely low. Instead, the likelihood that the two cases were committed by the same individual, or at minimum the same vehicle using a shared set of HVAC tools, was extremely high. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, law enforcement had physical evidence confirming a direct link between two seemingly independent cases. LAPD officially recorded that the 2005 Carmen Delgado disappearance and the 2008 Melissa Hart kidnapping were very likely perpetrated by the same individual, opening a new investigative direction based on polymer forensics and the distinctive occupational signatures of older HVAC work. After the polymer analysis results between the 2005 sock fibers and the 2008 nylon cord showed near-perfect matching, the interagency investigation team decided to reopen all old evidence files to determine whether the sequence of events extended further back than the 2000s. The first piece of evidence reviewed in this phase was the fabric fragment recovered at the 1991 Alyssa Monroe disappearance scene, a small, irregularly torn piece of material that had previously been considered of no investigative value due to the lack of analytical capability at the time. The fragment had only been preliminarily identified as a piece of synthetic fiber material, lacking distinctive patterns, and was ruled out because it could have come from clothing, a bag, or any item dropped by someone passing along the trail behind the apartment. However, with 2008 forensic advancements, particularly the use of FTIR infrared spectroscopy to identify polymer signatures, the forensics team resealed the old sample and began reanalysis. The fabric fragment was microscopically cleaned to remove nearly 2 decades of accumulated dust and dirt, then placed on the spectrometer stage for chemical composition scanning. The initial results were surprising. The fabric's absorption spectrum showed characteristic peaks of blended polypropylene with additives similar to the fibers recovered from the 2005 cotton sock. When the sample was subjected to deep comparative analysis mode, FTIR continued to reveal that the fabric contained the same hardened blend polymer, the same group of thermal stabilizers, and the same chemical hue recorded in the 2008 nylon cord sample. The only minor difference was the degree of polymer aging due to prolonged environmental exposure, but the base molecular structure still matched 1989-1990 HVAC-era materials. This similarity exceeded random coincidence and indicated that the 1991 fabric fragment had once been attached to an object or device using the same polymer type found in the 2 later cases. The forensics team continued with microfiber morphological analysis to determine whether the fragment belonged to carpet, vehicle lining, or another item. Under 400x magnification, the fiber structure revealed a grid-like weave characteristic of undercargo carpet liners in older trucks. When cross-referenced with data from synthetic fiber manufacturers of the late 1980s, investigators discovered this structure belonged to a line of truck carpets distributed retail to HVAC technicians and widely sold between 1989 and 1992. This analysis meant the 1991 fabric fragment could no longer be regarded as random residential litter. Instead, it became evidence that a vehicle related to the HVAC trade had been present on the trail behind Alyssa's apartment at the exact time of her disappearance. To confirm definitively, the team conducted Raman spectroscopy to identify additive blending signatures at the micro level. Once again, the distinctive 1989-1990 HVAC polymer appeared in a match across all three evidence samples. The three data sources, the 1991 fabric fragment, the 2005 sock fibers, and the 2008 nylon cord, formed a continuous chain of matches spanning nearly 2 decades, yet carrying signatures of the same material within the same occupational group. This analysis led the investigation team to conclude that the Alyssa case was not an isolated disappearance, but the first link in the perpetrator's behavioral pattern. The fabric fragment, once dismissed as trash, now stood as the first strong physical evidence linking the 1991 case to the subsequent sequence. In the Cold Case Review Summary Report, experts wrote that this polymer match was pivotal. There was no reasonable explanation for a piece of 1989-1990 HVAC truck carpet to appear directly behind Alyssa's apartment unless a vehicle fitted with that carpet was present at the precise time. The discovery location of the fragment, right along the K9 scent trail that was followed before being lost, further reinforced the judgment that the perpetrator had backed or parked a vehicle in this area to approach or remove the victim. When the data was pieced together, the conclusion became undeniable. The 1991 Alyssa Monroe disappearance was directly related to the same chain of disappearances leading to the 2005 Carmen Delgado case and the 2008 failed kidnapping of Melissa Hart. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, LAPD possessed physical evidence proving that the sequence of cases was not a series of disconnected events, but the product of a unified behavioral pattern, highly likely caused by a single individual. The HVAC perpetrator profile previously established based on behavior was now reinforced by systematic forensic linkage data. The Alyssa case was officially identified as the origin point of the disappearance chain. After determining that the fabric fragment recovered at the 1991 scene carried the same 1989-1990 HVAC-era polymer type as the evidence obtained from the 2005 and 2008 cases, LAPD launched a large-scale screening operation to identify HVAC technicians who had been active in the Los Angeles area during the early 1990s. This was a period when the HVAC industry lacked a centralized technician registration system. Labor management largely relied on scattered records from private companies, project-based contracts, and state tax databases. The investigative team compiled lists from more than 30 HVAC companies operating in Los Angeles during 1989-1992, while also gathering data from defunct businesses whose records were still held in county archives. After nearly 3 weeks of review, LAPD compiled a list of over 200 technicians who had worked full-time or part-time in the areas of Hollywood Hills, Glendale, Pasadena, and El Monte. 4 jurisdictions overlapping with the routes connected to the 4 disappearances or attacks. This list included technicians specializing in residential maintenance, mobile service providers, freelance contractors, and individuals who had registered for short-term seasonal work. To narrow the scope, the investigative team created a criteria matrix. The technician must have had a work schedule or residence near the area of Alyssa's 1991 disappearance, show signs of presence in or near Glenview at the time of Tiffany's 1993 disappearance, or have been present in El Monte around the time of Carmen's 2005 disappearance. When cross-referencing these 3 layers of data, the name Derek Malden appeared more frequently than any other subject. In the 1991 records, Derek was documented as a part-time HVAC technician for a small company based in North Hollywood, responsible for maintenance routes along the Santa Monica Hills, including Laurel Canyon and Franklin, 2 roads only about a mile from Alyssa's apartment. Although the company's internal records were incomplete, they still showed that Derek had received at least 2 small contracts in the Hollywood Hills area during the week of the incident. At that time, there was no reason for police to consider him a suspect, so the information was not deeply explored. When cross-checked against the 1993 Tiffany Reyes case in Glenview, Cook County residency records showed that Derek had lived at an address just 3 blocks from Tiffany's home for a 2-year period from 1992 to 1994. The timing of Tiffany's disappearance coincided with Derek working for an HVAC company in Illinois on a temporary contract assigned to maintain air conditioning units in small residential areas around Glenview, Skokie. He had been interviewed by Glenview PD, but was cleared from suspicion due to lack of physical evidence, even though his statements and residency timing aligned with the area where Tiffany vanished. In 2005, when Carmen Delgado disappeared in El Monte, LAPD discovered that Derek had returned to California and registered as a technician with an HVAC company in the San Gabriel Valley. In the technician dispatch list, his name appeared in the area less than a mile from Carmen's apartment 3 days before the incident. When cross-referencing the company's travel routes, LAPD determined that a truck assigned to Derek had been at a maintenance yard near El Monte during the week of the disappearance. Notably, this vehicle was a 1989 Texas-manufactured model, matching the group of vehicles identified as having polymer liners consistent with the 1991-2008 evidence. The repeated appearance of Derek's name across 3 different jurisdictions, all coinciding with the locations of the disappearances, led the investigative team to conclude that this was no longer random coincidence. Further screening records showed that Derek was one of the few HVAC technicians who had worked interstate between 1991 and 1993, a detail consistent with the ability to move quickly between California and Illinois to commit offenses. Moreover, Derek's employment history showed frequent shifts between small companies, staying only a few months at each before leaving. This pattern aligned with the perpetrator profile, a mobile technical worker who had legitimate reasons to enter residential areas, moved between different regions, and left no long-term traces at residences. When reviewing internal reports from Glenview PD in 1993, LAPD found the memo that had once been sent to California mentioning Derek, but classified at the time as insufficient connection. Now, with polymer analysis and occupational data, that memo became a crucial linking point, confirming Derek's presence in both states at the times of the first 2 disappearances. Derek's use of a 1989 truck, the type identified as highly likely to be the source of the polymer fibers, made him the most fitting subject for the entire evidence chain. On this basis, LAPD designated Derek Malden as the first primary suspect in the full sequence of cases spanning nearly 2 decades. After identifying Derek Malden as the primary suspect based on the overlapping locations and direct occupational ties to the evidence across 3 periods, LAPD began a detailed verification of his travel history, vehicles, and employment contracts to reconstruct his activity patterns over nearly 2 decades. This process required coordination with the California State Tax Authority, the DMV Vehicle Registration Office, rental history records, insurance data, and archived files from the HVAC companies where Derek had worked. The first step in verification was cross-referencing Derek's residential addresses year by year. Records showed he moved frequently. In 1991, he lived in a small apartment in North Hollywood, only about 2 miles from Alyssa's disappearance area. From 1992-1994, he resided in Glenview, Illinois, on the same street near victim Tiffany Reyes' home. In 1999, he returned to Los Angeles County, living in Alhambra, and in 2004, he moved to a rented room in El Monte, within a 3-minute truck drive of Carmen Delgado's apartment. The timeline map created by investigators showed no period during the 3 disappearances in which Derek was outside the accessible radius of the scenes. Next, LAPD analyzed Derek's work history by company. Although records were incomplete, work tickets still documented that in 1991, Derek handled maintenance for multiple apartments along Laurel Canyon and Mulholland Drive, areas bordering where Alyssa disappeared. In 1993, the Illinois HVAC company assigned Derek to service equipment in 3 housing complexes only half a mile from Tiffany's disappearance site. By 2005, the San Gabriel Valley HVAC company also assigned Derek the El Monte route, and according to internal dispatch logs, the truck he used had been at a maintenance yard just 1 day before Carmen vanished. All this data allowed investigators to sketch a relatively consistent movement pattern. Derek typically operated within small residential zones, and had free evening hours for movement. When examining the vehicles Derek used, investigators found in DMV records that he had once registered a 1989 Texas-manufactured gray civilian pickup truck, part of the light-duty truck group used in technical trades. The vehicle was first registered in California in 1990, transferred to Derek in 1998, and sold to a new owner in 2006. Tax and vehicle insurance records indicated that before the transfer, Derek had used the truck under a vehicle of assignment arrangement within the North Hollywood HVAC company during 1991-1992. This was precisely the vehicle type identified as having carpet liners matching the recovered evidence. To assess whether the truck could have been present at the 1991 scene, LAPD ran the faint tire tracks recovered from the dirt road behind Alyssa's apartment through tread comparison software. The results showed that the tread pattern, though not clear enough to identify the exact model year, was consistent with the width and groove style of the 1989 Texas truck line. The depth of impression in the soil also matched the load weight of a pickup carrying HVAC equipment. Although not considered conclusive evidence, the vehicle type similarity further supported the hypothesis that the truck Derek used at the time could have been in the area. LAPD continued cross-referencing Derek's travel routes on the days near the three disappearances. Data from the North Hollywood HVAC company showed Derek had no fixed contract on the day Alyssa vanished, meaning he had free time and could move within the area. In Illinois, Derek's work ticket noted he left a job site at 7 p.m. on the evening Tiffany disappeared, with travel time to the victim's home only about 5 minutes. In the 2005 case, the HVAC company's dispatch log recorded Derek at a station near El Monte on the evening before Carmen vanished. When mapping the routes, LAPD observed that all of Derek's known paths passed through or very close to the incident locations. Beyond that, Derek's occupational behavior, constant movement, frequent legitimate presence in residential areas, use of technical trucks, and work with outdated HVAC materials matched the profile constructed by the analysis team. Investigators concluded that Derek's activity pattern was consistent not only temporally, but also technically, as only HVAC technicians with many years of experience would have access to and continue using older generation materials. LAPD's preliminary conclusion stated that Derek appeared within accessible range of all major crime locations in the 4 key cases: Alyssa in Hollywood Hills in 1991, Tiffany in Glenview in 1993, Carmen in El Monte in 2005, and the industrial area where Melissa was held in 2008. This level of overlap went beyond coincidence and provided grounds for LAPD to regard Derek Malden as the sole suspect with reasonable presence near every disappearance site over nearly 2 decades. After completing verification of Derek Malden's vehicles and travel history, LAPD moved to review locations he had rented or used across different periods, especially those with structures similar to the industrial garage described by surviving victim Melissa Hart. During the search for rental and storage records of HVAC technicians in the early 1990s, investigators discovered an old registration entry in Eagle Rock under Derek's name, showing he leased a small metal warehouse from 1991 to 1993. The warehouse was located on the edge of a residential area adjacent to a deteriorated industrial road, fitting the type of temporary workspace used by mobile technicians. Since Derek no longer had access to the warehouse and the lease had long expired, LAPD obtained a formal search warrant to inspect the internal structure and any remaining materials. Upon entry, they immediately noted significant similarities between the Eagle Rock warehouse and Melissa's description of her captivity site. Gray metal panel walls, rough concrete floor, rows of old piping along the walls, an industrial ceiling fan, and metal shelving holding scattered tools. Although the warehouse had been vacant for many years, many interior details still bore traces of technical activity, resembling a place once used for dismantling, repairing, or storing HVAC equipment. Forensic technicians began scanning the floor surfaces and shelving for chemical traces. In one corner area, the analyzer detected residual freon in dried streak deposits on the concrete at levels sufficient to indicate that refrigeration equipment had been handled or refrigerant had been released there. Older freon types, particularly R12 and R22, rarely appeared in civilian storage without an occupational reason. The freon discovery became the first major match between the actual location and Melissa's description. Upon deeper inspection of gaps between metal shelving and wall panels, the forensics team recovered numerous dust-adhered fiber fragments, which were sealed per modern protocol and sent to the lab for comparison. Analysis results showed these fibers contained the same hardened polypropylene polymer type as the fibers from the 2005 case and matched the polymer in the 1991 fabric fragment. Although degradation was higher due to prolonged lack of preservation, the spectral characteristics and fiber structure were sufficient to confirm they belonged to the same 1989-1990 HVAC material group. This match made the Eagle Rock warehouse the first location with direct physical evidence linking all three periods, 1991, 2005, and 2008. Investigators continued scanning the metal workbench area against the wall and discovered a series of old invoices stuck between two panels. Most were deteriorated, but one intact upper portion contained critical information. It was an invoice for HVAC supplies purchased in June 1991, including nylon cord, flexible tubing, compressor gaskets, and technical truck carpet liners. The invoice bore the name of the North Hollywood HVAC company, exactly where Derek had worked in the same year Alyssa Monroe disappeared. Although the invoice did not specify the purchaser by name, as the company typically bought supplies in bulk at that time, attached accounting records included a technician code for the individual responsible for the Hollywood Hills area during that period. When the code was checked against the company's surviving archived files, LAPD confirmed the recipient of the supplies was Derek Malden himself. This was the first time the investigation traced a physical document proving Derek's use of outdated HVAC materials at the exact time of Alyssa's disappearance. In addition to the invoice, investigators examined the rear door structure of the Eagle Rock warehouse. They noted that the latch, hinge placement, and sliding panel cover matched Melissa's description of how she unlocked and escaped, a simple horizontal sliding bar latch attached to thin steel panels, operable with a sudden pull. This further reinforced the hypothesis that the location where Melissa was held was very likely a warehouse of similar construction to Eagle Rock. If not the same one, then part of the same type of structures Derek was familiar with using. When reviewing warehouse rental logs, LAPD found that Derek continued to lease or use similar warehouses in various locations throughout the 1990s and 2000s, following his mobile occupational pattern. This positioned Eagle Rock as a structural link consistent with the perpetrator's behavior, approaching victims in safe locations, transporting them by technical truck, and taking them to secluded secondary sites. With three groups of data, matching polymer fibers, occupationally consistent freon traces, warehouse structure aligning with the surviving victim's description, and 1991 supply invoices directly tied to Derek, LAPD for the first time had sufficient legal grounds to elevate Derek Malden from a person of interest to a high-priority surveillance target. This was also the moment authorities concluded that the chain of events over nearly 2 decades could no longer be viewed as disconnected coincidences, and Derek's ownership, use, or presence at the related locations placed him at the center of close monitoring for the first time since the investigation began. Immediately after searching the Eagle Rock warehouse and recovering a strong enough group of evidence to elevate Derek Malden to high-priority surveillance status, LAPD implemented a 6-week intensive surveillance plan to observe his complete travel routes, daily habits, work patterns, and all transactions, with the goal of determining whether his current behavior matched the pattern that had persisted for 22 years. Surveillance began by deploying 2 rotating surveillance teams to monitor from Derek's residence in Alhambra, recording his departure times, travel directions, arrival at work sites, and any areas he visited outside his professional scope. In the first week, Derek left home around 6:30 a.m., drove his older model pickup truck, used for HVAC work, and traveled via Huntington Drive, Valley Boulevard, and various San Gabriel Valley side streets. He stopped at air conditioning maintenance sites according to the company's schedule, with no unusual activity observed. However, police quickly noticed that Derek consistently extended his time parked after each service call, often remaining in the vehicle for 10 to 20 minutes before leaving. This behavior was not illegal, but was noteworthy because it aligned with the previously identified pattern from 1991, 2005, the perpetrator lingering at or near the scene longer than necessary to observe the environment. In the second week, Derek began taking routes not included in his work schedule. After finishing his shift, instead of heading straight home, he drove to an abandoned industrial area near Pasadena, less than a mile from where Melissa Hart had appeared. He did not exit the vehicle but drove slowly past 3 rows of warehouses, then circled back along a narrow, low-traffic rear road. Police recorded this as a route Derek had no occupational reason to use, but since no criminal act occurred, it was only noted in the surveillance log. Throughout the entire 6-week period, Derek repeatedly exhibited behavior of scouting isolated areas, large empty parking lots, old industrial warehouses, low-traffic hillside roads near residential zones. The locations he visited were often situated between populated areas, resembling the type of secondary site selection described in the behavioral profile. Additionally, police observed Derek habitually loading large amounts of old HVAC equipment into his truck bed, metal piping, coils of nylon cord, compressor components, and technical truck carpet liners. These were materials matching the polymer evidence from the 3 cases. They also discovered that he continued purchasing outdated HVAC supplies from liquidation stores, an unusual practice because the HVAC industry by then had shifted to newer materials, yet Derek appeared interested only in obsolete stock consistent with the polymer traces recovered in 1991, 2005, and 2008. In the third week, Derek visited an empty metal warehouse in Highland Park with a structure nearly identical to Eagle Rock panel walls, concrete floor, simple horizontal latch door. He remained in the area for 45 minutes, performing no work for any client, making no phone calls, and offering no explanation for his presence. LAPD viewed this as a significant match with a secondary location usage pattern. In weeks 4 and 5, Derek was recorded driving around Hollywood Hills during late hours, sometimes stopping near apartments tucked deep at the end of slopes, terrain similar to where Alyssa disappeared. He did not exit the vehicle, but turned on his headlights toward residences for a few seconds before driving away, as though surveying routes or assessing environments. This conduct could not be classified as criminal, but it significantly matched the pattern of approaching victims through distant observation. In addition, bank card transaction data showed Derek purchased small quantities of HVAC supplies from 3 specialty stores during the 6-week surveillance period, including nylon cord, old compressor parts, and types of tubing no longer in common use. Continuously buying technologically obsolete materials was atypical for a modern technician, but perfectly consistent with the perpetrator profile of maintaining the same material types for over 2 decades. Every route Derek traveled during the 6 weeks aligned with the described behavioral structure: residential areas with few cameras, abandoned industrial zones, empty parking lots, low-traffic hillside roads near previous case sites. He committed no new offenses, and did not directly approach women, but his overall pattern of observation, terrain selection, supply purchases, and vehicle handling fully reflected the repeating pattern across 22 years. LAPD concluded that although no attack occurred during the 6-week surveillance, the collected data strongly reinforced the suspect profile. Derek Malden's habits of movement, vehicle type, materials used, and approach style completely matched the chain of disappearances spanning more than 2 decades. After 6 weeks of continuous surveillance and sufficient documentation of behavioral patterns, matching the HVAC perpetrator profile active over 22 years. LAPD decided to shift to a more proactive phase, obtaining search warrants for Derek Malden's residence and vehicle to collect direct physical evidence. Based on the surveillance report, polymer data, geographic connections to the cases, and evidence recovered from the Eagle Rock warehouse, investigators prepared an affidavit for a search warrant and submitted it to the Los Angeles County Court. The court approved the warrant, finding that the chain of facts established probable cause to believe that materials, tools, or traces related to the disappearances were present in Derek's residence and vehicle. The search warrant was executed at dawn to prevent Derek from having time to destroy evidence. The tactical team approached the rented room where he lived in the Alhambra residential area, secured the perimeter, and separated Derek from his vehicle before he could access the truck bed. As forensics entered the small residence, the first thing they noticed was a faint chemical odor in the storage room, a mixture of compressor oil, metal dust, and residual freon, similar to what Melissa described during her captivity in the garage in 2008. Although the smell was not strong enough to serve as standalone evidence, it was an initial indicator that Derek was storing old-generation HVAC equipment inside the home. Upon inspecting the tool cabinet, investigators found multiple spools of HVAC-specific nylon cord, one of which had been partially cut, with surface scratches consistent with the cut marks on the nylon cord Melissa had brought with her during her escape. The cord segments had been randomly cut into short lengths, resembling the type used for quick silent restraint. Forensics seized all the cord spools, numbered and sealed them for polymer spectrum comparison. On the small workbench, the search team discovered a pair of gray rubber gloves. What drew their attention was not the gloves themselves, but the layer of dust adhering to the surface under bright lighting. Technicians observed bright microfibers mixed with gray dust, a characteristic matching the polymer fibers recovered from the 2005 case and the 1991 fabric fragment. Rapid on-scene analysis with a handheld device showed these microfibers had a reflectance spectrum consistent with hardened polypropylene, meaning they were highly likely dust fibers from old technical truck carpet. This was the first piece of evidence directly showing Derek's contact with the polymer material, matching the three cases. In the HVAC equipment storage room, the investigative team found 3 old compressors of the type that had been recalled from the market since the 1990s but still appeared in the Eagle Rock warehouse. On one compressor, they detected dried freon spray residue, forming characteristic crystalline deposits on the body. Below it, the room floor showed fan-shaped wear patterns from long-term freon leakage, a type of biochemical trace difficult to fabricate. This was pre-regulation R12 freon, matching the trace sample analysis from the Eagle Rock warehouse and Melissa's description. Derek's retention of such old HVAC equipment indicated he continued using supplies from the same generation as the polymer appearing in the case chain. When examining the vehicle, forensics focused on the bed of Derek's truck. Beneath the worn technical carpet liner, they found numerous small fibers crushed under metal dust and machine oil. These fibers were collected per micro-evidence protocol. The rear seat of the truck, though covered by a black tarp, still showed traces of nylon fibers mixed with freon residue, possibly from transporting equipment. Notably, the rear door hinge area exhibited small scratches consistent with the rubbing marks Melissa described from inside while attempting to force the door open during her escape. On the cargo area floor carpet, forensics recovered 3 different fiber types, one common polyester, one consistent with old HVAC polypropylene, and the third showing aged polymer characteristics matching the 1991 sample. The presence of all 3 fiber types simultaneously in the vehicle significantly increased the likelihood that Derek had used the truck across multiple phases of the case series. When checking the storage compartment behind the driver's seat, they discovered an old fabric bag containing gloves, thin duct tape, and a multi-tool knife. None of the items bore blood or DNA, but the polymer on the duct tape belonged to the same material group recovered in the 2005 case. In addition, LAPD found a recent HVAC supply purchase receipt in Derek's name, recording the acquisition of more nylon cord, identical to the sample Melissa provided. This showed he not only possessed, but continued replenishing the exact type of supplies the perpetrator had used. When compiling evidence from the residence and vehicle, nylon cord, with matching polymer gloves-bearing fibers, freon traces, old HVAC equipment, carpet containing fibers consistent across multiple time periods, LAPD had sufficient probable cause to believe Derek Malden was directly involved in at least 3 disappearances and 1 kidnapping. At this point, DNA, or a confession, was not necessary, as the chain of technical evidence exceeded the threshold required to issue an arrest warrant. That same afternoon, LAPD, in coordination with the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, arrested Derek Malden at his workplace, marking the first time in over 2 decades that a primary suspect in the disappearance series had been identified and lawfully detained. After Derek Malden was arrested at his workplace and transported to LAPD headquarters, the investigative team conducted the first interrogation session with the goal of presenting the entire chain of data collected throughout the extended investigation, from polymer forensic evidence to the suspect's movements over more than 2 decades. The interrogation began by confirming Derek's personal information, occupation, and employment history before investigators moved on to presenting the investigative pattern constructed from multiple independent sources. They displayed a timeline showing Derek's presence at or near all disappearance locations: Hollywood Hills in 1991, Glenview in 1993, El Monte in 2005, and Pasadena in 2008, while emphasizing that this level of coincidence far exceeded random chance. Next, investigators sequentially presented the polymer evidence, the 1991 fabric fragment, 2005 fibers, and 2008 nylon cord, all 3 containing the same 1989-1990 HVAC-era polymer, a material type that Derek was one of very few technicians still using over such a long period. They showed Derek images of the carpet liner in his 1991 truck and compared it to fibers recovered from the scenes, reviewed freon traces on old HVAC equipment at his residence, and listed all matching materials found in the Eagle Rock warehouse. Investigators stated that the warehouse interior matched the description given by surviving victim Melissa Hart, and that the June 1991 HVAC supply invoice bearing his technician code was the first direct occupational link to Alyssa Monroe's disappearance. They then presented the 6-week surveillance data: Derek driving to abandoned industrial areas, lingering unusually in low-traffic residential zones, purchasing obsolete HVAC materials no longer common in the market, and repeatedly scouting terrain exactly as described in the perpetrator behavioral profile. One investigator listed each route Derek had traveled, including areas unrelated to his work schedule that matched the pattern of target approach, distant observation, selection of secluded points, avoidance of cameras and traffic. All data was presented meticulously, step by step, demonstrating that Derek fit the perpetrator model more closely than anyone else. However, as soon as the presentation began delving into specifics, Derek immediately denied any involvement. He insisted that he only performed normal HVAC work, that the polymer evidence in his home resulted from storing old equipment due to professional habit, and that his presence in various areas was solely due to the job's requirement for frequent travel. When asked why he had been near the location where Melissa was held, he said he only stopped by to look for cheap tools or reusable parts from abandoned warehouses. When investigators questioned him about the 1991 invoice and then the fibers, nylon cord, and polymer samples, Derek maintained that all the HVAC supplies he used were leftover stock from previous employers and had no connection to any criminal activity. He also denied knowing Alyssa, Tiffany, Carmen, or Melissa, claiming the occupational similarities were merely unfortunate coincidences. Despite investigators pressing with the 1991 tire tracks, fibers on the gloves, freon samples on compressors, and surveillance routes, Derek continued to deny any link, repeatedly stating that he was simply doing his job and had no part in any kidnapping or disappearance. Whenever pushed into detail, he shifted to arguing that old generation HVAC materials were very common in the industry and anyone could possess similar polymers, even though investigators knew the number of technicians still using that material type at the time was extremely limited. Throughout the interrogation, Derek remained calm but uncooperative, evading critical questions, refusing to explain his presence at key locations, and demanding that investigators stop speculating based on disconnected coincidences. When confronted about the Eagle Rock warehouse, he only replied that the warehouse had been used when necessary for work and denied any connection to any victim, although the full investigative pattern had been thoroughly presented, from polymer forensics, locations, vehicles, occupational history, to surveillance behavior. The Phase 1 interrogation yielded no new statements or breakthroughs. Derek weighed every answer carefully, avoided contradictions, and consistently returned to the claim that he was an ordinary HVAC technician who had been misunderstood. The investigative team noted that Derek's level of denial aligned with the behavior of suspects with long-term structured criminal patterns: no wavering, no strong reaction to evidence, no inquiries about victims, and no unconscious leaks of information. The Phase 1 interrogation ended without advancing the case toward a confession or mistake by the suspect. However, investigators still viewed it as an important part of the overall strategy because Derek's firm denials helped clarify the necessity of relying on objective evidence rather than expecting a confession at this stage. The team concluded that Phase 1 interrogation produced no additional information but did not weaken the investigative file. On the contrary, it reinforced the assessment that Derek Malden would not voluntarily confess and that the entire pursuit must continue to rest on accumulated forensic data, travel history, and technical evidence. After Phase 1 interrogation yielded no significant statements or openings, the LAPD investigative team decided to proceed to Phase 2 interrogation with a markedly changed strategy. Instead of presenting the overall pattern as before, they employed focused pressure, using individual forensic data groups, specific travel routes, and Eagle Rock warehouse evidence to force Derek Malden to confront the level of overlap that far exceeded explanation by coincidence. Phase 2 interrogation began by displaying detailed FTIR analysis of the 3 polymer samples from the 3 cases: the 1991 fabric fragment, 2005 fibers, and 2008 nylon cord. Investigators pulled up the spectral charts on screen and explained each absorption peak to Derek, stressing that not only was the base polymer identical, but the hardening additives, thermal stabilizers, and blend structure all matched the material type exclusive to 1989, 1990 truck carpets, and HVAC binding cords, a group of materials that Derek was one of the very few technicians still possessing in 2008. When investigators asked whether Derek could explain how polymers from 3 different decades appeared in cases only where he had resided or worked, Derek's expression changed slightly, no longer completely impassive as in Phase 1, but he still maintained denial and stated that at least hundreds of HVAC technicians used the same materials. Investigators immediately countered with data. By 2005, only 4 stores in all of California sold that polymer type, and one of them was less than a mile from the Eagle Rock warehouse, where Derek had leased from 1991 to 1993. When pressed further about the June 1991 HVAC supply invoice bearing his technician code, Derek averted his eyes and said it was just a general invoice, but investigators pointed to the crew chief assignment notation matching Derek's exact code, causing him to fall silent for several seconds before continuing to insist he didn't remember the reason for purchasing supplies at that time. The second pressure phase focused on the Eagle Rock warehouse. Investigators showed Derek a series of photos: Freon residue on the concrete floor, industrial ceiling fan, old piping, metal shelving rows, and especially the wall panel section with the horizontal latch matching Melissa's description of the escape door. They emphasized that fibers recovered from the warehouse matched the 1991-2008 evidence and demanded he explain why a warehouse he leased for years contained fibers consistent with 3 disappearances separated by thousands of miles and decades. Derek tensed his shoulders and said the warehouse had been shared with other HVAC technicians, but investigators produced the lease certificate showing only one name on the contract, Derek Malden. Pressure mounted, but he still refused to provide more. When the questioning turned to the vehicle, investigators placed photos in front of Derek, the 1991 tire tracks, the 2008 truck carpet wear angle, and fibers recovered under the current truck seats. They demanded he explain why the tread pattern and polymer fibers in his 1989 truck carpet matched multiple cases across 2 states. Derek continued denying, but his voice was no longer as firm. He began responding with "you're over-interpreting," rather than offering specific arguments. When investigators moved to the recent 6-week surveillance data showing him driving to abandoned industrial areas, lingering in low-traffic residential zones, and purchasing obsolete HVAC supplies, Derek's demeanor shifted noticeably, no longer sitting upright, but leaning elbows on the table, avoiding direct eye contact. He said surveying industrial areas was just curiosity, and staying long in the vehicle after shifts was envy of people with bigger homes. Investigators noted this crack in his previous composure. The interrogation moved to direct confrontation. Investigators demanded Derek explain why polymers from 1991, 2005, and 2008 all showed similar wear patterns, and why all 3 related to carpet liners and binding cords from the same equipment generation. They stated plainly that one individual was behind everything. That person has HVAC knowledge, uses a 1989 truck, appears in Hollywood Hills, Glenview, El Monte, and Pasadena, leases the Eagle Rock warehouse, purchases supplies in June 1991, and continues acquiring nylon cord and the same polymer in 2008. That's you. Derek stared at his hands for a moment, showing signs of wavering, but ultimately said, "I don't know what you're trying to pin on me, but I'm not connected to any of them." Investigators kept pressing, pointing out that no other HVAC technician appeared near all the scenes like he did. Derek responded more slowly, no longer decisive, but only saying, "I can't explain the coincidences." Although the change in demeanor was documented, from calm to tense and evasive, he still did not confess anything. Phase 2 interrogation ended with the suspect providing no new information, but the investigative team assessed this as a significant sign. Forensic pressure had caused Derek to lose his previously perfect defensive posture, indicating that the strategy of focusing on objective evidence had produced substantial impact, even if it had not yet broken his silence. After Phase 2 interrogation revealed a clear change in Derek Malden's demeanor, no longer maintaining an overly perfect defense, despite still denying all involvement, the investigative team decided to proceed to a 3rd interrogation session, focusing on exploiting the points where he had wavered, particularly his reactions when questioned about the polymer matches, the Eagle Rock warehouse, and travel routes overlapping with the disappearance sites. Phase 3 interrogation was conducted the following morning, in the context of Derek having spent his first night in custody without information on the ongoing investigative direction. At the outset, investigators did not immediately reference any case, but instead asked Derek about his work routine in the early 1990s, especially his access to residential areas in Hollywood Hills during service calls. This retrospective line of questioning caused Derek to relax more than in the previous session, and he began describing long workdays, the routes he commonly traveled, and even casually mentioned that some apartments didn't lock their doors properly. When investigators shifted tone and asked directly about accessing Alyssa Monroe's apartment, Derek paused for a moment, but unlike previous phases, he did not immediately deny it. He looked to the side, took a long breath, and said quietly that he had repaired air conditioners in that building a few times. Investigators immediately followed up. "Did you enter Alyssa's apartment that evening?" Derek remained silent for quite a while, then answered, "I did take her outside." This was the first time the suspect admitted direct contact with a victim at the critical time of a case. Investigators continued with open-ended questioning. What was the reason you took her outside? Derek still avoided eye contact and only replied that she asked for help with an air conditioning system issue. Although the answer was vague and lacked logic given the case file circumstances, it confirmed he was no longer denying his presence at the apartment during the time Alyssa disappeared. When asked how he took her out, Derek said, "We went out the back way. I don't remember exactly." Investigators immediately cross-referenced. The back way is where we found the fiber fragment matching the polymer from your truck carpet. Do you confirm you led her down there? Derek did not answer directly, but did not deny it. He only said possibly. I don't remember all the details. This represented a significant shift from total denial to partial admission of approaching and moving the victim. Nevertheless, when investigators asked the core question, where did Alyssa go afterward? Derek closed off again, asserting, I don't know. I took her to the vehicle, then she left on her own. This directly contradicted the entire investigative data set, but investigators noted this as a clear sign that Derek was deliberately withholding critical information. They continued. Did you take her to the Eagle Rock warehouse or to another secondary location? Derek immediately shook his head and said, I never took anyone there. When questioned about the other victims, he returned to denial but no longer with the confidence of earlier sessions. He only said, I worked in that area but I didn't know anyone. With the Carmen Delgado case, he reacted more strongly, demanding the question stop and refusing to answer further. This progression indicated he clearly sensed the mounting level of accusation. As the interrogation neared its end, investigators closed with one final question. Do you confirm that you led Alyssa out of the apartment on the night she disappeared? Derek looked down at the floor, then answered, I already said. I did take her outside. This was the most significant admission obtained throughout the investigation process, yet it remained only partial. He did not disclose where he took Alyssa, did not confirm any details about holding or disposal, and completely avoided mentioning the body's location. Phase 3 interrogation concluded with the determination that the suspect had begun admitting presence and actions related to the victim, but deliberately concealed the most critical information, the location to which the victim was taken after leaving the apartment. After Phase 3 interrogation, when Derek Malden first admitted to leading Alyssa Monroe out of the apartment, but remained firmly silent about where she was taken or her subsequent condition, the investigative team and the Los Angeles County prosecutors re-evaluated the entire legal strategy. Although the evidentiary file was strong enough to charge him with multiple serious counts, they still lacked the single most critical element, the location of the body. Without a body, there was no way to determine the mechanism of death, no final forensic traces, and no ability to rule out the suspect attempting to create legal loopholes at trial. This created the necessity of bringing Derek to a state where he was willing to make a full disclosure, something the previous interrogation sessions had not achieved. After a 2-hour meeting, the prosecutor proposed a breakthrough legal strategy, proceed with a conditional plea negotiation in which Derek would be considered for removal of the death penalty if and only if he provided the location of Alyssa Monroe's body and verifiable information related to the events after leaving the apartment. This was not an uncommon tactic in long-running cases where direct evidence of the body was the pivotal missing piece, especially in cases regarded as extremely serious and repetitive in nature, such as this series of disappearances. To ensure the process complied with legal standards, the prosecutor and a representative from the district attorney's office drafted the formal offer, which was permitted to be presented to the suspect in the presence of counsel protecting his legal rights. The meeting took place in the interrogation room, with Derek's defense attorney present, as requested after Phase 3. The investigator opened by recapping the evidence collected, matching polymers, freon traces, fibers in the Eagle Rock warehouse, travel routes spanning 22 years, and Derek's partial admission. The prosecutor then clearly presented the offer, if Derek provided the location of Alyssa Monroe's body in a condition verifiable by forensic examination and accurately described the steps leading to the body being placed there, the prosecutor's office would formally remove the possibility of seeking the death penalty and replace it with a sentence of life imprisonment without parole. Upon hearing the offer to remove the death penalty, Derek did not react immediately. He looked toward his attorney as if seeking confirmation. After the attorney heard a summary of the offer, he requested a brief recess to confer privately with Derek. During the nearly 10-minute private discussion, Derek showed clear signs of wavering. He no longer maintained the rigid posture of earlier sessions and asked his attorney whether disclosing the body's location would reduce any other charges. The attorney replied that it would not. The other charges would remain intact, but eliminating the death penalty was the single most significant legal benefit he could receive under the current circumstances. When negotiations resumed, the prosecutor reiterated that the offer was only valid if Derek provided specific, actionable information leading to the recovery of the body, not vague or unsubstantiated descriptions. This was the key condition to prevent the suspect from deliberately supplying false information to delay proceedings. At this point, Derek's demeanor shifted markedly. His body leaned forward, his hands clenched in brief pulses, his eyes no longer fixed on the floor, but looking directly at the offer document. He asked, "If I cooperate, you will not seek the death penalty on any charge related to me," the prosecutor affirmed. "Correct? If you disclose the accurate location and we recover the body based on your information, the death penalty will be completely removed from the charging document." This moment marked the most significant turning point in Derek's attitude since his arrest. He no longer maneuvered through denial or evasion, but began weighing the life or death stakes. The defense attorney reminded him that continuing silence in the face of such strong evidence would expose him to the highest risk, the death penalty, and that this opportunity might not arise again. After nearly 30 seconds of silence, Derek placed his hands on the table, exhaled deeply, and said, "I want the deal. I agree." The investigator asked him to confirm again for the record. Derek spoke more clearly, "I will tell you the location. I accept the agreement." This response was fully recorded in the presence of counsel and the prosecutor, marking the first legal negotiation session in the entire investigation where the suspect agreed to provide critical information in exchange for removal of the death penalty. However, although he agreed in principle, Derek did not immediately disclose the location. He only confirmed that he knew the place and would lead them once the agreement was formally signed. This was the most significant outcome of this negotiation phase. The suspect had officially agreed to cooperate and acknowledged his ability to provide the body's location, something more than 2 decades of investigation had never achieved. After Derek Malden agreed in principle to the legal deal, the prosecutor immediately finalized the formal document and submitted it to the defense attorney for review and signature, before notifying the investigative team to prepare to escort the suspect to the location he claimed was where Alyssa Monroe's body was concealed. The next morning in the interrogation room, the investigator asked directly, "Are you ready to take us to the location?" Derek nodded, showing genuine cooperation for the first time, though his eyes remained tense. When asked to provide a preliminary description of the location so the team could prepare, Derek said, "On Santa Susana Pass, near an old trail, a low rock ledge. I'll point it out." Hearing the name Santa Susana Pass, a dry, rocky range between Simi Valley and Chatsworth that once contained dozens of seldom-used old trails, was enough for investigators to understand that locating the site without direct guidance would be nearly impossible. An escort detail was formed consisting of 10 personnel, investigators, forensics team, county prosecutor's office representative, and security personnel. Derek was removed from LAPD headquarters in a secure transport vehicle, handcuffed but not hooded so he could see the route, while being led to the exact location. As the convoy left Los Angeles and crossed the 118 freeway toward Simi Valley, Derek remained silent, eyes fixed straight ahead. Only when the vehicle turned into the Santa Susana Pass State Historic Park area did he speak. Go a little farther. Turn onto the dirt road. The convoy stopped at a small access point, leading into the Rocky Hills, an area without signage and showing very few signs of human activity. Police carefully removed Derek's handcuffs, but kept his hands in a control hold, then instructed, lead the way. Derek walked slowly through the rocky slope, pointing toward a low patch of ground between two large rock formations. He said, down there, next to the clump of brush. I buried it deep. Investigators immediately marked the spot, ordered Derek to step back, and handed the area over to the forensics team. The search began with surface scanning, using metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar (GPR). At the second soil layer, GPR detected an anomaly, a stratified zone differing from the natural geology, suggesting prior disturbance. Forensics began manual excavation using small trowels, brushes, and specialized tools. About 40 minutes later, a technician paused and called out, "We have something." The soil was brushed aside, revealing a long bone segment covered in the fine dust characteristic of the Santa Susana area. As they dug deeper, the rest of a human skeleton emerged, positioned in a curled posture consistent with hasty, shallow burial. Beside the bones was a thin metal bracelet with small lettering, which the family had described in 1991 as a gift Alyssa always wore. In addition to the bracelet, forensics recovered a small hoop earring and the remains of a star-shaped keychain, all items listed in Alyssa's personal property inventory when her family reported her missing in 1991. These items were sealed on-site, numbered, and sent to the forensics vehicle. While the team continued excavation, technicians noted that the jawbone remained relatively intact, sufficient for dental record comparison. This was the most critical identification method in fully decomposed skeletal cases, as teeth have a hard structure, withstand harsh environmental conditions, and typically retain unique identifying information. The entire skeleton was carefully collected, placed in forensic bags, and loaded onto the vehicle in silence. An investigator looked at Derek and asked, "Is this Alyssa?" Derek did not look directly at the excavation pit. He only said, "If you want to confirm, confirm. I brought you to the right place." The answer was not a full confession, but implied confirmation of the location in accordance with the legal agreement. Upon returning to headquarters, the skeleton was immediately transferred to the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office for dental record comparison. Alyssa's family dentist had provided records from 1989 and 1990, including the shape of tooth #7 on the left with composite filling and a minor edge defect on the front incisor. After 3 hours of analysis, the forensic odontologist issued the conclusion: jaw structure, root positions, and filling matched Alyssa Monroe's dental records completely. The official report was forwarded to the prosecutor's office. Identity confirmed: Alyssa Monroe. Confidence level 100%. There was no longer any doubt. The body recovered at Santa Susana Pass was the victim missing since 1991. Confirmation of identity through dental records completed the most critical portion of the investigation, spanning more than 2 decades, affirming that Derek Malden had led police to the correct concealment location and that his earlier partial statements were fundamentally accurate. This result also marked a milestone in the entire case file. The body's location had been identified, scene evidence matched the recovered remains, and victim identity was confirmed by a forensic method of absolute accuracy. After Alyssa Monroe's identity was confirmed through dental records, and the official forensic report affirmed that the body at Santa Susana Pass was the victim missing since 1991. The investigative team recognized this as the strategic moment to continue pressing Derek Malden regarding the other cases with similar patterns. The legal agreement remained in effect, and the prosecutor wanted to capitalize on the newly formed level of cooperation after Derek had confirmed Alyssa's burial location. In the next session, when the investigator asked directly, "What about Tiffany Reyes?" Derek initially appeared tense, glancing toward his attorney, but then did not fully deny it as he had before. He remained silent for a long time before saying, "That happened when I was in Illinois. This was the first time he acknowledged any connection to Tiffany's 1993 disappearance in Glenview, a case previously classified as lacking evidence of foul play due to the absence of a body and direct witnesses. The investigator continued, "Can you lead us to the location?" Derek replied. "I don't remember as precisely as in California, but I know the area. I can point it out." The answer was vague but still a major advance. He admitted knowing the location rather than denying any connection, as in previous sessions. Following a quick conference between California and Illinois agencies, Glenview PD was immediately notified and agreed to coordinate in a joint federal operation to locate Tiffany's body. Derek was placed in an interrogation room with a Glenview PD representative participating via live video link. When asked to describe the area, Derek said, "There's a small road behind the old factory, a strip of low trees and a sunken patch of ground. This matched a region searched in 1993 but never discovered due to the overly broad area and lack of specific guidance." Derek continued, "I didn't bury deep, soft soil near where there's a chain link fence." Glenview PD immediately cross-referenced this description with 1993 terrain maps and identified the area behind the abandoned steel mill, where a chain link fence had once been damaged and later replaced. The Illinois team asked Derek to mark the location on satellite imagery. He circled an area approximately 20 meters wide, saying that if you dig in the right direction, you'll find it. With the guidance received, Glenview PD launched a ground search coordinated with the Illinois State Forensics team. The area Derek indicated had changed somewhat over time, but geological layers showed prior soil disturbance at a depth of about 1 meter. When ground-penetrating radar was deployed, a return signal appeared almost immediately, an inconsistent structural zone indicating old burial. Forensics began manual excavation. The first soil layer was unremarkable, but in the second layer, a technician discovered a small faded fabric fragment consistent with the cotton synthetic blend material Tiffany had worn in her jacket at the time of disappearance. Expanding the excavation, they recovered a sequence of matching items, a thin metal necklace, described by the family in the 1993 report, a remaining shirt button, and a fragment of a small athletic shoe. These items bore no blood or soft tissue due to prolonged soil exposure, but collectively matched the inventory of clothing Tiffany wore when she left the garage that evening. Digging deeper, forensics located the remains of a human skeleton. No surface identifiers remained, but the lower jaw teeth were intact and allowed dental record comparison. Glenview PD immediately sent the skeleton to the lab for comparison with Tiffany Reyes' 1992 dental records. Within 4 hours, the forensic odontologist concluded tooth hash 14 showed an amalgam filling in the correct position, and tooth hash 8 exhibited characteristic edge wear identical to the dental records. The official report confirmed the recovered remains were Tiffany Reyes. Beyond locating the body, Glenview PD recovered another critical piece of evidence beneath the soil layer at the bottom of the pit. Technicians found 2 small fibers adhering to the compacted earth, polymer structure matching the 1989-1990 HVAC fibers analyzed by LAPD. This proved the Interstate connection, the polymer from the 1991 California case, the 1993 Illinois case, the 2005 case, and the 2008 case, all belong to the same material group, with Derek as the sole common link across all locations. The Illinois report sent back to Los Angeles stated clearly, fibers recovered at Glenview match the distinctive spectrum of the polymer samples provided by LAPD. With Tiffany's body located and matching evidence recovered, the multi-state linkage was finally complete. The disappearances in California and Illinois could no longer be viewed as separate incidents. All belonged to a unified pattern spanning 2 decades, tied to the same suspect, the same occupation, the same vehicle, and the same polymer signature. This established the official recognition of a multi-year interstate criminal pattern crossing state jurisdictional boundaries. Glenview PD notified LAPD. Identity confirmed. Evidence confirmed. linkage complete. Investigators in California understood that the 22-year case chain had finally been fully connected, and Derek Malden no longer had any realistic means of denial in the face of forensic evidence and multi-state data. The chain was complete. The 2013 trial opened in Los Angeles Superior Court, marking the final phase of an investigation spanning more than 2 decades, during which the entire body of forensic evidence, disappearance patterns, suspect travel routes, and Derek Malden's partial statements were presented to the jury in a systematic and irrefutable manner. The prosecutor opened by reconstructing the timeline from 1991 to 2008, emphasizing that the 4 cases, Alyssa Monroe, Tiffany Reyes, Carmen Delgado, and the failed abduction of Melissa Hart, were not random events, but a consistent behavioral sequence originating from a single perpetrator. They presented the polymer analysis. The fabric fragment recovered behind Alyssa's apartment in 1991, fibers from the cotton sock outside the El Monte yard in 2005, and the nylon cord Melissa carried during her escape in 2008. All containing the same 1989-1990 HVAC-era polymer, a rare material that appeared only in truck liners and technical supplies distributed by manufacturers in the late 1980s. FTIR analysis, Raman spectroscopy, and microfiber morphology were detailed, demonstrating that the degree of match far exceeded random occurrence. The prosecutor continued with evidence recovered from the Eagle Rock warehouse, leased by Derek from 1991 to 1993, including matching polymer fibers from the 3 cases, old generation Freon traces, HVAC piping, and the June 1991 supply invoice bearing Derek's technician code. Next, the prosecution presented the suspect's 22-year movement data, including residency history, HVAC employment contracts, technician dispatch routes, and results of the 6-week surveillance immediately prior to arrest. A projected map clearly showed Derek present or residing in every disappearance location: Hollywood Hills 1991, Glenview 1993, El Monte 2005, and Pasadena 2008. No other HVAC technician appeared within comparable proximity. In particular, the prosecutor emphasized that Derek's post-shift driving routes perfectly matched the secondary location approach pattern described by the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. Abandoned industrial zones, vacant land, trails adjacent to residential areas. When moving to evidence recovered from the residence and vehicle, the prosecutor displayed images of partially cut nylon cord found in Derek's home, with cut marks consistent with the 2008 sample, gloves bearing fibers, matching the 1991 and 2005 polymer, and dried Freon streaks on old HVAC equipment. On the truck's carpet liner, forensics recovered fibers showing aging patterns identical to the fragment from behind Alyssa's apartment, indicating the material had traveled across multiple sites over a long period. Video of the vehicle search was played, proving the presence of 3 distinct fiber groups, all linked to the case series. Following the forensic presentation, the prosecutor introduced Derek's partial statements from interrogation, particularly his admission of taking Alyssa outside, the first break in his long chain of denials. Although Derek denied any harm, his acknowledgement of direct contact with the victim on the night she disappeared was described by the prosecution as an irreversible point, because all evidence proved he was the last known person to lead the victim from the apartment. When presenting the interstate linkage, a Glenview PD representative took the stand and described the exhumation of Tiffany Reyes's body based on Derek's directions. They introduced recovered evidence, fabric matching Tiffany's jacket description, a thin metal necklace, a shoe fragment, and 2 polymer fibers, identical to the California evidence. The dental identification report confirming Tiffany's identity was entered into the record before the jury. The prosecution argued that no abstract suspect could have provided the burial location after 20 years in the ground, except the person responsible. For Alyssa Monroe, the prosecutor displayed the Santa Susana Pass map with precise coordinates where Derek led police, accompanied by images of the bracelet, earring and skeleton identified through dental records. A forensic expert explained that the shallow burial method, disturbed geological positioning, and grave configuration matched hasty burial profiles described in criminal forensic literature. In closing, the prosecutor stated to the jury, not one case, not two cases, but 4 events connected by forensics, by behavior, by geography, and by admission. A single individual present at every point, Derek Malden. The defense attempted to argue that polymer evidence was insufficient to prove guilt, and that Derek's statements were made under duress, but the prosecution countered with the chain of independent data, the 1991 invoice, 2005 fibers, 2008 nylon cord, 1993 routes, and burial locations Derek himself led police to. In conclusion, the prosecution charged Derek with offenses including kidnapping resulting in death, committed multiple times, with elements of planning, preparation of secondary locations, body transport, and prolonged concealment. After weeks of trial, the jury returned to the courtroom and announced the verdict: Derek Malden guilty on all major counts, including aggravated kidnapping, concealment of bodies, and causing death during the commission of crimes. This was the first time in 22 years that the entire disappearance series was conclusively resolved in court. After the jury found Derek Malden guilty on all counts of kidnapping resulting in death, concealment of bodies, use of secondary locations, and causing death during the commission of crimes, the trial moved into the sentencing phase, where the Los Angeles County Superior Court judge reviewed the entire case file, including the prolonged severity of the conduct over many years, the element of premeditation, continuous concealment, the impact on the victims' families, and the limited cooperation that only emerged after a legal agreement guaranteeing removal of the death penalty. In the packed courtroom, the judge pronounced the final sentence: life imprisonment without parole for each major count, to run consecutively, ensuring that Derek Malden would never be released. The sentence was imposed based on the extreme brutality of the 22-year behavioral chain, and the finding that Derek's late cooperation was motivated solely by avoiding execution rather than genuine remorse. After the sentence was read, the courtroom fell silent. Representatives from LAPD, Glenview PD, and the California-Illinois forensics teams were present to witness the official conclusion of one of the longest-running investigations both states had ever handled. The very next day, LAPD began compiling the final 22-year investigative summary report, regarded as the most significant document in the department's historical case files. The report opened with an analysis of the disappearance pattern: young female victims vanishing in private environments with no signs of struggle, extremely short approach windows, and no direct evidence left at the primary scenes. Step by step, the report described how polymer forensics became the backbone of the investigation: the fabric fragment recovered behind Alyssa's apartment in 1991, fibers from the El Monte yard in 2005, and the nylon cord from the Melissa case in 2008, forming a continuous forensic chain that had gone unrecognized for 2 full decades until the case was reopened. Next, the report detailed the construction of the perpetrator profile: HVAC occupation, ability to enter residential areas without arousing suspicion, use of an older model truck with matching polymer-lined carpet, and the habit of employing secondary locations in abandoned industrial zones. A substantial section described the large-scale screening of HVAC technicians active in Los Angeles in the early 1990s, during which Derek Malden emerged as the only individual present in every area connected to the 3 disappearances and 1 failed abduction. Residency data, work schedules, maintenance contracts, and travel routes were cross-referenced in a timeline spanning more than 40 pages, showing Derek consistently fell within the accessible radius every time a victim vanished. A dedicated portion of the report described the search of the Eagle Rock warehouse, the critical turning point in the investigation. There, Freon traces, matching polymer fibers, and the June 1991 supply invoice bearing Derek's technician code created the first major breakthrough, elevating him from person of interest to primary suspect. Investigators described the warehouse as a behavioral replica of the crime pattern, isolated, metallic, low traffic, sufficiently concealed to hold a victim briefly. The 6-week surveillance phase was also presented in detail. Derek's unusual routes, habit of scouting remote areas, continued purchase of obsolete HVAC supplies, and repeated movement patterns consistent with victim approach behavior. All were documented with timestamps and geolocation maps. A separate chapter covered the interrogation progression from complete denial to wavering in Phase 2, and finally to partial admissions in Phase 3, where he acknowledged leading Alyssa out of the apartment. These developments, combined with objective evidence, illustrated how the legal and forensic strategy forced the suspect closer to the truth. The next major section recorded the escorted trip to Santa Susana Pass and the exhumation of Alyssa's body. Every step was precisely described: positioning, marking, GPR scanning, excavation, recovery of the bracelet, earring and dental record comparison. This was regarded as the moment that closed most of the unanswered questions from the 1991 file. The report continued with the Interstate linkage, documenting Derek's statements about Tiffany Reyes, Glenview PD's search operation, the Illinois exhumation, and the final polymer match that proved the entire series was connected to one perpetrator. The completion of the California-Illinois connection was described as the final lock on the federal case file. At the end of the report, LAPD evaluated the more than 20-year investigation as a testament to persistence, forensic advancement, and the ability to link data across technological eras. They concluded that without the application of materials science, especially polymer analysis, the case could have remained forever in the cold case category. On the day the report was finalized, the files for Alyssa Monroe and Tiffany Reyes were marked with the final status, closed, offender convicted. Veteran investigators placed the final report copy in the archive, marking the end of one of the most complex and enduring cases in LAPD history. The story of the 22-year disappearance series, beginning with Alyssa Monroe, extending to Tiffany Reyes in Glenview, then to Carmen Delgado, and the failed attack on Melissa Hart, reflects an issue that remains highly relevant in contemporary American life. The hidden dangers lurking in environments considered the safest, especially when people must allow home service providers, such as HVAC technicians, electricians, plumbers, or repair workers, into their homes. The cases of Alyssa and Tiffany demonstrate how the perpetrator exploited the nature of his profession to gain access to victims. He had legitimate reasons to appear in residential areas, could legally enter homes, possessed technical means to restrain without noise, and had the knowledge to use secluded secondary locations, such as the Eagle Rock warehouse, something many Americans today still do not consider when permitting service personnel inside. The story also serves as a reminder that a single small trace, such as the 1991 fabric fragment or the fibers on Derek's gloves, can become crucial evidence if properly preserved. This underscores the importance of the public reporting small but unusual details, such as unfamiliar trucks appearing repeatedly, odd nighttime sounds, or suspicious observation habits by a technician. Melissa Hart's survival also illustrates how awareness of chemical odors, spatial observation, and detail retention can save lives and aid investigations. From the entire case file, the greatest lesson for modern American society is this: personal safety must begin with vigilance. People should verify the company and identity of technicians entering their homes, share service appointment schedules with family members, install door cameras or video doorbells, and above all, trust their instincts when something feels off, something many victims did not have time to act on. The story concludes, but the reminder to stay alert, transparent, and protective of one another continues to resonate in American life today. Thank you for following the entire journey of solving this case that spanned more than 2 decades. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep supporting us. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring mysterious cases that seem buried by time.